This man had only gone into hibernation for one sleep, yet it lasted for an unbelievable length of time. That sleep ended up lasting a full 100 million years. When he woke, the world had completely changed, and he had naturally become an ancient human. He was even regarded as inferior, simply because he was not a beastman, which was truly bitter, but he had no desire to hide his strength, and with a single punch, he knocked down an S-rank boss. That power left everyone who witnessed it utterly terrified. This was no different from a myth, and everything had to be told from 100 million years ago. In the 22nd century, on planet Earth, a horrific disaster had swallowed the entire world. Beneath a sky burning crimson, a fighter jet swept over the ruined city, carrying a figure standing firmly on its wing. He murmured, "Finally found it." Immediately after that, he plunged down from a height of thousands of meters, heedless of the violent wind shrieking around him. On the ground, a boy ran in panic through the shattered streets, gasping in despair as he cried out, "Is anyone there?" The boy cried and screamed in overwhelming agony. "Is anyone still alive here? Please answer me." But what answered that call was not human, but terrifying monsters with blood-red eyes. They surrounded him from every direction, making him fall to the ground and cry out desperately for help. "Someone save me, please call 113 for me." In his hand, he still clutched the torn family photograph tightly. "Anyone will do, please come save me." He hated those who had turned the world into ashes, and prayed that someone would make them pay. That very moment, a streak of light tore across the sky and shot down like an arrow. Jin appeared with overwhelming might, striking down the monster right before his eyes. Jin quietly said that he was sorry for arriving too late. The boy looked up at the strange man in astonishment. "Hey, who are you?" He smiled through his tears as though he had just found his final hope. "Ah, right, we finally took the world back." Jin gently held the boy in his arms, softly replying to soothe that poor soul. "Yes, that is right. So rest easy now." On the boy's back was an extremely severe fatal wound. The boy whispered his final thanks and went limp in his arms. "Thank you so much, truly thank you." Jin stood silently amid the ruins, watching the final human life he had just found slowly fade away. From behind, Kagura stepped forward and said bitterly, "Jin, you arrived so late, you are no different from a guest at a banquet." He confirmed that the boy just now was the last survivor of this land. Kagura coldly told Jin to face the truth. The cruel truth was that humanity had truly reached its end. Earth was now nothing but a dead planet, drowned in the red hue of destruction. This place was filled with hideous mutant monsters and corrupted creatures born from hatred. Prolonged environmental pollution had wiped out all of human civilization. They even possessed an unbelievable ability to regenerate their bodies. Even nuclear weapons could not completely exterminate them. Even so, the last scientists still did not give up. After many cruel experiments on humans, they found a special tool for counterattack. Kagura looked down at the rubble, his voice heavy with despair. "It is over. There is no one left to save. Let us go back." Looking at the final survivor who had just passed away, he bitterly admitted that the two of them had arrived too late. Yet Jin still stood firm, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "There is still something worth protecting." Kagura asked doubtfully whether he truly believed there were still survivors out there. Jin answered quietly, "Not exactly what I believe in lies in the future." Kagura looked at the ultrafine particles and asked, "The nanomachines you worked so hard to create can also heal the environment, right?" Jin confirmed it. That nano army did not merely block their regenerative ability. They also neutralized the corrupted creature's recovery and initiated the regeneration process for this planet. Jin believed that one day, this planet would regain its original pristine beauty. And when that time came, a new civilization would surely sprout, just as humanity once had. Hearing those words filled with hope, Kagura could only sigh. It sounds like some distant fairy tale. It seemed far too unrealistic, but for Jin, that alone was enough. He stood amid the ruins and smiled peacefully. Even a tiny ray of hope was enough to let him continue. Because his power might be needed for the future, he decided to enter the hibernation chamber, wagering everything on a distant tomorrow. Kagura looked at his partner, thinking to himself that perhaps belief in those two words might just be the key to saving the world. He told himself that it was enough as long as he could hand an opportunity to the next generation. Then he resolutely pressed the button, starting Jin's 10,000-year sleep. The hibernation system officially began operating, opening an entirely new journey. It was a journey through time, hidden behind a cold steel shell. Numbers on the clock began to surge upward, marking hundreds of silent years passing by. Then came thousands of long, endless years. At this time, Earth was still like hell on Earth, a place ruled by hideous mutant creatures. They lurked throughout the collapsed ruins and dead lands. Time passed in silence, and that number had reached millions of years. Under the influence of the nanoparticles, the atmosphere gradually changed, the destructive red giving way to the blue of seas and the green of grasses and trees. Gentle beasts began to appear on the green plains, marking the planet's miraculous rebirth after countless upheavals. 100 million years after Jin fell into deep sleep, the system suddenly verified the access code and activated the hibernation release procedure. At the same time, in a desolate land, Hakama was fleeing with all her strength, her rapid breathing revealing her panic. Behind the little girl, along with Dan, Paul, and Sandy, was a gigantic beast with blazing red eyes and bared fangs, as though it was about to pounce. On the brink between life and death, Dan Paul anxiously asked whether he was truly in this place. Hakama still answered with certainty that he was, though Sandy trembled in fear that if he was not here, the three of them would hardly escape death. Hakama still held firm to her belief. The little girl gripped the key hanging around her neck, her eyes filled with determination. In those eyes shone a fierce faith in their guardian god. The three stopped before the giant metal door of the shelter, believing that he was right behind the layer of steel. Hakama led her two friends deep into the shelter, then suddenly froze and spoke. "Hey, look over there." Dan, Paul, and Sandy panicked when they discovered the escape route had been blocked, leaving only a dead end ahead. That very moment, the red-eyed monster had caught up, baring its sharp teeth and blocking the only path. Sandy trembled in despair. "Wait, what are we supposed to do now?" With death closing in, Hakama could only look up and plead desperately, "Please save us." As if a miracle had occurred, the glass of the hibernation chamber suddenly cracked and shattered, while the system rang out, "Request received." A blinding burst of light erupted, blasted the chamber apart, then shot away like an arrow. That beam of light pierced straight through the monster's head, sending it flying far away right before everyone's eyes. Witnessing that unbelievable scene, all three children went utterly still, unable to believe their eyes. From the wreckage, a pair of bare feet stepped out, treading on shards of broken glass. Jin officially awakened, his body firm and powerful, his eyes blazing with authority, his hand gripping the surging nano-energy. Looking at the storage box, Jin silently admired Kagura's invention, and was glad that his outfit had remained perfectly preserved. He walked to the control panel, accessed the data, and wondered whether this was truly the world 100 million years later. Although the important data had been heavily damaged, Jin was still amazed that the shelter had endured for so long, perhaps thanks to the nanoparticles. Right beside it, the nanomaterial injection device was also ready for use. Jin held the message cube, the only relic Kagura had left behind, his heart heavy before the calamity that had befallen Earth. But before looking any deeper, he suddenly realized a difficult problem, and asked the three children about the current situation. Seeing Dan Paul hurriedly cover Hakama's eyes, Jin finally realized he was wearing nothing and reproached himself for being truly indecent. After quickly putting his outfit back on, Jin felt much more relieved. He nodded in satisfaction, telling himself that this appearance was finally worthy of the name hero, then donned his majestic cloak to step into the new era. Jin walked to the exit, gathering his strength to force open the giant shelter door that had remained sealed for all those years. And the three children stepped out of the shelter. Before the magnificent natural scenery, Jin stood stunned and wondered whether this truly was the world 100 million years later. Before him lay a lush green land, layered mountains, and winding rivers, with no trace of the old era remaining. While Jin was still lost in astonishment, Hakama gently tugged his clothes and spoke, "Lord Guardian God." Hakama waved and led the way, urgently urging him on. "Please follow this path and stay close to us." Watching the three children running ahead, Jin could not help growing suspicious. He wondered whether they were truly human when humanity should have gone extinct in the previous era. Over that long span of time, perhaps they'd evolved into humanoid forms under the influence of the nanoparticles in the air. The fact that they still spoke the same language from 100 million years ago made that theory even more plausible. Jin smiled faintly. "I still have not introduced myself. My name is Jin, just call me Jin." The little girl leading them answered politely, "My name is Hakama. Please just call me Hama." The Beastman boy also spoke up quickly. "And I am Dan Paul." The remaining boy timidly followed. "I am Sandy." Jin nodded, then asked what they wanted him to help with. Hakama firmly pleaded for him to deal with the invaders for them. Jin was briefly surprised and repeated, "Invaders." Before he could ask more, Sandy suddenly went pale and cried out in a trembling voice, "This is bad. Our village is burning." In the distance, their village was engulfed in a sea of flames, black pillars of smoke rolling upward and tearing across the peaceful sky. Sandy and Hakama rushed toward the fire in panic, shouting for their parents, while Jin silently followed and observed. He swept his gaze carefully over the entire scene before him. Jin noticed that the fences and rows of houses here had all been built rather crudely from wood. He silently assessed that the civilization of the new humanity did not seem to have developed very far yet. As soon as they arrived, Hakama was stunned by the chaotic scene unfolding before her eyes. A terrifying creature was restraining an elderly woman, causing the little girl to cry out in pain, "Grandma." Recognizing her granddaughter, the old woman struggled to resist while shouting in alarm, "Hakama, is that you? Why did you come back at a time like this?" Standing behind them, Jin silently observed the attacker and wondered whether that was what everyone called an invader. Despite her grandmother urging her to leave this dangerous area at once, Hakama still did not retreat. Her body shone with a flow of blue energy, as she firmly declared that she would stay and help her grandmother. Jin told himself it was time for him to act and verify everything, then immediately moved with astonishing speed. Jin shot upward, unleashing a vicious heavy blow that grievously wounded the monster and sent it flying far away. He saved the old woman just in time, gently helped her up, then quietly told her to leave it to him. Seeing the guardian deity step in to help, Jin immediately encouraged Hakama, "Excellent, keep going." Without the slightest hesitation, the little girl poured all her strength into her palm. A blazing fireball appeared, was immediately launched straight at the enemy. The maximum energy from that attack erupted violently. Monster was struck down, only managing to roar in pain before falling completely still. Watching the monster collapse, Jin silently confirmed that the microparticles were taking effect, because the corrupted cells were no longer regenerating. He wondered about the current of energy the little girl had just used. Could she control the nanoparticles in the atmosphere, even though normally only compatible people could do so? Jin asked the old woman whether that fireball was common in this era. She answered in astonishment that only a few people possessed divine power, and in the whole village, including her, there were only 4. Jin fell into thought, realizing that the divine power they worshipped was actually their name for the energy that controlled nanoparticles. Hakama hurried over and asked her grandmother about the villagers. The old woman reassured her that everyone had been safely evacuated, but she also could not hide her anger, scolding the children for returning to such a dangerous place. The old woman's face sank, and she bitterly admitted that this village had practically reached its end, because the monster they had just struggled to destroy was actually only a newly hatched juvenile. The old woman explained in a trembling voice that if they encountered truly mature ones, they would have almost no way to withstand them. Before long, an entire swarm of young monsters would come and wipe this place clean. Right then, Sax appeared with an extremely confident bearing. He told his grandmother not to be cowardly, then boasted that the invaders were nothing before his strength. The old woman asked where the villagers were. Sax replied that he himself had led everyone to a safe shelter. Seeing her father with them, Hakama joyfully rushed over and threw her arms around him. Her father was both happy and worried, asking where she had gone to make him search in a panic. When Hakama confessed that she had gone to the sealed door, her grandmother was horrified and scolded her for being far too reckless, daring to enter the forbidden zone. Hakama looked toward Jin, explaining that she believed the story her grandmother had told about the guardian deity sleeping behind the door, the one who would save the village in a crisis. Faced with that great calamity, the old woman looked Jin up and down with eyes full of suspicion. She thought to herself that he did not look the slightest bit like a god. Sax, standing beside her, also laughed in contempt, believing that someone from an inferior species like Jin could never be a guardian deity. Those words made Jin pause for a moment. He repeated thoughtfully, "An inferior species, are you looking down on me?" Sandy hurriedly defended him, saying Jin really was the guardian deity. But Sax coldly cut her off. "So it turns out you disappeared, because you went with Hakama." He stepped closer to Jin, pointed straight at him, and sneered for them to look at those hands. An inferior being with none of the traits of the beast folk. Sax was certain that Jin had only happened to wander around there, while the children had misunderstood, even though Sandy insisted that Jin had defeated an invader. Sax still sneered, saying that one like that would fall with a single move from him. He aimed the icy sharp tip of his spear at Jin and lowered his voice in a threatening warning. "Listen carefully, this is an internal matter of village. We do not need a lowly outsider interfering." After saying that, Sax turned and walked away, coldly adding another threat that Jin should not meddle carelessly. When his father asked in alarm where he intended to go, Sax loudly declared that he would eradicate the giant monster at its root. He looked back and said with contempt that the rest of them could stay there and tremble. The old woman angrily scolded him as a fool, then hurriedly urged the children to flee and save their lives. The old woman looked at Jin with both gratitude and pleading, asking him to take the children to the shelter with her son if he could. As for her, she decided to chase after Sax and stop him, as if staking everything on one final gamble. But Jin suddenly spoke up, saying he had no time to be an errand boy. He said coldly that he had his pride too, and could not let that man keep calling him inferior. Watching Sax leave, Jin gave a cold smile and said to let him go throw his life away on his own. From the waterside, a giant monster with rough, bumpy skin slowly emerged. Its blazing red eyes flashed, and its roar thundered across the entire area. Facing that ferocious creature, Sax showed no fear at all, and instead looked exceedingly arrogant. He tightened his grip on his spear, let blue lightning envelop his body, and loudly declared that he would bear the fate of the nation and become a holy knight. Looking at the hideous monster bearing its fangs before him, Sax mocked it in disdain, saying it was nothing more than an ordinary invading creature. He poured his strength into the spear point, charged straight ahead at terrifying speed, and shouted for it not to block his path. A thunderbolt-like thrust struck down, making the monster howl in desperate agony. The battle grew increasingly fierce as more monsters began to appear. He quickly surrounded Sax from every direction, tightening the encirclement around him. Amid the enemies, Sax continuously swung his spear, creating razor-sharp blue slashes as he roared that they were blocking his path. Sax had absolute faith in his own strength. He growled that a single slash from him was enough to finish off his opponent. Sax gathered momentum, then shot into the air at astonishing speed. He poured all his power into the decisive strike and shouted, "Receive this." An overwhelmingly powerful slash tore straight through the giant monster's body. Sax landed with a triumphant smile, watching the monster collapse amid agonized roars before lying still. However, the smile on Sax's lips quickly vanished. Deep wounds on the monster's body suddenly closed, its flesh twitching as it healed itself at a terrifying speed. Sax turned pale, stammering in disbelief that the cuts on its body were regenerating on their own. Immediately after that, a gigantic shadow suddenly crashed down. The monster swung its razor-sharp claws, bringing down a thunderous blow that left Sax only enough time to curl up in desperate defense. In that life-or-death instant, a familiar figure suddenly stepped in front of Sax. Jin calmly faced the monster, his arm covered in a glowing nano-shield, then mocked him coldly. "Are you done performing, kid? Let me handle this." Cold sweat streamed down Sax's forehead as he stared at the back of the man he had just looked down on. The monster roared furiously, while Jin merely curled his lips in arrogant disdain. Behind him, Sax remained stunned, wondering, these creatures can still move. Without giving the opponent any chance to react, Jin raised his hand and made one decisive motion. Instantly, a terrifying surge of energy shot straight up from the ground and pierced through the monster's chest. The monster was sent flying backward. Sax stood frozen in the water, staring blankly at the wreckage and wondering what was happening. From afar, Grandmother and the villagers also rushed over in panic, calling his name again and again in utter worry. "Grandmother, run this way. Hurry up, Sax." And yet, when the old woman saw the scene and Jin's extraordinary power with her own eyes, she could only stand rooted in place, her gaze filled with terror. "What the hell is happening before my eyes?" Seeing the colossal monster stopped with just one hand, Sax cried out in shock. That massive body was blocked with one hand. Sax, who had been shouting loudly just moments ago, now fell completely silent. Jin felt the pressure gradually increase and murmured, "It is starting to get heavy." Jin immediately ordered everyone to temporarily fall back, then firmly grabbed Sax and shot away. He quickly changed direction to avoid the attack from that hideous creature. After bringing Sax safely back to the ground, Jin let go. He was still shaken, then looked up and asked, "Uncle, are you actually human or some kind of transforming machine?" Jin looked toward the monster and calmly explained that they could regenerate instantly, no matter how much damage they suffered. He stated that this was why they had to use nanoparticles to completely lock away their regenerative ability. Hearing that unfamiliar concept, Sax asked blankly, "Nanoparticles?" Jin explained that they were exactly what the people of this era still called divine power. He also commented on Sax's earlier effort. That strike just now was not bad. Too bad it was too shallow and failed to trigger the recovery blocking effect. Before that overwhelming power, Sax trembled as he asked whether Jin was truly the guardian deity from legend. Jin replied indifferently that he was no god at all. However, there is one thing I need to make clear. Jin looked straight into Sax's eyes and repeated, "You said this was the village's own affair, right?" Though Sax still forced himself to shout and assert himself, "Yes, that is why I—" Jin immediately cut him off with absolute decisiveness. "You are completely wrong." He charged straight toward the roaring monster and declared that in truth, this was his own problem. The monster gnashed its sharp teeth and roared fiercely as it faced Jin's attack. Jin moved at an astonishing speed, his cold gaze locked firmly onto the target. He said decisively, "Stay still, let me fix a small technical error." With just a snap of his fingers, streams of nano-energy instantly erupted with violent force. Energy struck down again and again, leaving the monster dazed and unable to defend itself. Jin coldly spoke the truth. These grotesque things were born from our own stupidity. Jin clenched his fist to gather power, and radiant blue lightning began to cover his arm. He clearly affirmed his responsibility. Therefore, as someone who survived from an era 100 million years ago, I have to end this mess with my own hands. The energy in Jin's hand swelled larger and larger, radiating a terrifying pressure that made the surrounding space tremble. Behind him, Sax trembled and asked in disbelief, "I do not understand everything you said, but can you really do it?" Jin answered only briefly, yet with certainty, "Of course I can." Jin spoke in a low voice as tragic scenes of history surfaced in his mind. "Because I am the product of human civilization, carrying a bloody, brutal, and tragic history. From ancient warriors to soldiers of the modern age, even the cruel experiments carried out in laboratories. All of them were traces of the harsh past that had created him, the last surviving human individual." Jin's killing intent erupted. He roared, and a colossal pillar of energy immediately shot from his hand. The beam of light pierced straight into the sky, swallowing the monster whole. The hideous creature only had time to gape in terror before being erased by that destructive power in an earth-shattering explosion. Destructive light from Jin's hand surged into the air, powerful enough to pierce through the atmosphere and remain clearly visible from outer space. Before that godlike power, all the villagers, from the elderly to the children, stood in silence, their eyes filled with both terror and worship. Hakama looked at her guardian deity with eyes sparkling with faith and admiration. The little girl was moved as the village was truly saved. As the dust and smoke gradually dispersed, the sky seemed to have been torn open, revealing a patch of clear blue. Sax collapsed onto the ground, drenched in sweat, stammering wordlessly before what he called an advanced scientific weapon. Jin casually brushed the dust from his shoulder, as if he had just finished something utterly ordinary. Then he turned his head slightly, his gaze indifferent, and dropped a brief line, "Done. That feels much better." However, that entire earth-shaking battle had fallen into the eyes of a stranger. Within the bushes, an orange-haired girl wearing glasses was silently observing through a lens. She had originally been sent to investigate the newly emerged invading creatures around Kodama village, only to unexpectedly witness something beyond imagination. The sight left her stunned as she wondered, what is going on? Even the captain could not do that. Realizing the gravity of the situation, she decided she had to return to the royal capital immediately. With an expression both excited and worried, she sprang up, preparing to set off and report the entire shocking incident to the guild master. Jin opened the message cube, and Kagura's voice rang out, breaking the still atmosphere. "Can you hear me, Jin?" Kagura continued in a distant, sorrowful tone, "If you are listening to these words, I am probably no longer in this world. With acting this dramatic, it would be a waste not to become an actor." But immediately afterward, he changed to a smug tone. "Haha, I have always wanted a chance to say a classic movie line like this." Jin simply stood there in silence, exasperated by his partner's unchangeable personality. Kagura curiously asked about the future, guessing that the global environment must have improved greatly thanks to nanoparticles. However, Kagura's face in the recording suddenly grew serious when he mentioned a new problem. He went straight to the point. "The environment is greener now, yet those monsters are still unbelievably hard to kill." Jin looked thoughtfully at the image of the hideous monster roaring, realizing that this battle was far from over. Kagura revealed that he began to realize something was wrong about a millennium after Jin entered long-term hibernation. To witness the changes of the world through each era with his own eyes, Kagura also had no choice but to enter periodic hibernation. Looking down from a satellite in outer space, thanks to the gradual revival of the natural environment, the number of the corrupted had clearly decreased. And yet, right in the middle of lands that seemed to have regained their peace, terrifying new existence appeared, bearing a human form, with purple hair blazing like fire and blood-red eyes thick with killing intent, standing beside the corpse of the beast it had just defeated. As natural conditions changed, evolved variants of the corrupted also began to emerge with power far beyond what they had before. Kagura could not help worrying, since he had no way of knowing what direction they would mutate in. But one thing was certain, they would become an unpredictable threat to the new civilization. The only thing he could do then was prepare for the new lives behind him. Hakama and Dan Paul needed to be given the ability to withstand those monsters, even if only by a little more. Kagura went on to reveal a backup source of power that he had specially prepared for Jin alone. Jin looked up at the syringe containing the blue liquid glowing brilliantly. The nanograins would resonate on their own and guide him in how to control that power. Without the slightest hesitation, Jin decisively drove the needle into his arm. The nanostream quickly penetrated and spread throughout his blood vessels. Through the strengthening process, Jin became the only individual absolutely compatible with Nano, holding supreme authority. Feeling the new energy surging through his body, Jin reached out, staring in astonishment as a cold, sharp blade gradually formed from rings of radiant energy. He immediately understood that this was the ability to create matter by restructuring the shape of nanoparticles. Holding the item he had just created, Jin silently admired that technology. Kagura added that he had hidden similar upgrade energy sources in secret research facilities scattered across the planet. Dispersing them was meant to avoid the risk of them falling into the hands of the corrupted or being destroyed all at once. More importantly, Kagura wanted Jin to explore the vast world out there on his own, because even he could not predict how dangerous the corrupted would become in the distant future. Kagura smiled as he left his final message in the recording. "Why worry? Just go out and enjoy the scenery to your heart's content." Through the virtual reality screen, Kagura looked at Jin with gentle yet regretful eyes. "I will not be able to stay by your side and witness that with you." This colleague of his really was a little sentimental. Brushing aside his own emotions, he smiled and entrusted his final hope. "Everything is counting on you, Jin." The message ended, and Jin quietly tightened his grip on the cube in his hand. He answered softly, as if making a vow of honor, "I have understood." Just then, Hakama and Dan Paul's voices sounded from behind him. "Lord Guardian Deity, so you were here." Dan Paul breathlessly reported that the whole village was frantically looking for him. Hakama took Jin's hand and urged him, "Please return quickly. The feast cannot begin without the main guest." As he was walking, Jin's gaze suddenly halted on the necklace Hakama was wearing. He was secretly astonished when he recognized that familiar shape. Wearing the Research Institute key as jewelry, Jin immediately asked the little girl about the origin of the pendant. Hakama honestly explained that her family had received it from a great personage in ancient times. Little girl carefully held up the copper key and continued, "This is a protective charm passed down through many generations. They say that when the village is in danger, it will guide the guardian deity here to protect us." Hearing that, Jin smiled faintly as every doubt in his heart was answered. So that was it. No wonder she was able to get inside. Looking at the backs of the two children eagerly leading the way, he told himself that he owed them a very great debt. The three returned to the village, where a lively feast was taking place around a blazing bonfire. Cheers echoed throughout the path. "Over here, hurry up." However, amid that bustling atmosphere, Jin's appearance still made some villagers look at him with suspicion. They gathered together and whispered, "Is that person really the legendary guardian deity?" A beastman took a sip of wine and curled his lip in disdain. "No matter how you look at him, he is only some lowly fellow." Amid the festive atmosphere of the banquet, the whispers continued to ring out. The beastmen sipped their wine while gossiping without end, looking that frail and still claiming to be a hero. Yet the moment they saw Sax approaching with a grave expression, their attitude immediately changed. Sax shouted loudly and scolded them, "Worry about staying alive, yet you still have the nerve to complain." The crowd panicked and gathered around to ask after him, "Are you still all right, sir?" They all turned toward Jin and bowed their heads in apology. "We are truly sorry for being rude. Our god, the guardian deity, is indeed extraordinary." Seeing that scene, Jin could only sigh wearily at the villagers' dizzying change in attitude, completely different from their initial contempt. Just then, the village chief and Hakama's grandmother approached Jin with an extremely respectful demeanor. The village chief bowed very low and said sincerely, "Allow me to thank you once again on behalf of the villagers." If Jin had not appeared in time, Kodama village would surely have been wiped out. Both of them wanted to repay this great kindness. However, Jin merely smiled calmly. "Everyone, please do not worry too much about that. But if you truly wish to help, I do not need material things. What I need right now is information," Jin said frankly. "I want to know the current situation of this world as clearly as possible." The village chief and the old woman were briefly stunned by his overly broad question. After a moment of contemplation, the old woman spoke with a suggestion. "In that case, it would be best for you to make a trip to the royal capital." She explained that the royal capital was where His Majesty the King ruled the mighty kingdom of Kamosia. People from everywhere gathered there, so news from the outside would certainly be very complete. Their Kodama village also often sent people there to trade their specialty silk made from woodworms. The old woman frankly shared that although the road was long and full of danger, with the guardian deity's ability, it surely would not be a major problem for Jin. Seeing that Jin was still awkward because he'd not know the way, she rubbed her granddaughter's head and proposed that Hakama guide him. After all, the girl also had her own business in the capital. When Jin wondered about it, she revealed that he must have seen the girl could use divine power. She said that in the royal capital, there was an academy specializing in training and developing this sacred power. Although she had once considered giving up because of the recent upheaval, she still hoped Hakama would enroll as planned. Jin was slightly surprised to learn that in this era, schools still existed. Right then, a loud shout cut across the conversation. "Wait, everyone, hold on." Sax shoved the crowd aside and declared loudly, "I am the one worthy of guiding the guardian deity." When the grandmother asked about the royal capital, he confidently bragged that he intended to join the ranks of the holy knights in the capital. Yet the old woman immediately poured cold water on him by mentioning that he had not passed the academy entrance exam. Sax roared in frustration, "You old woman, what did you just say? Isn't having divine power enough to be accepted?" The old woman calmly explained that aside from power, candidates also had to pass a written exam. Jin thought to himself, so that was it. Sax was an idiot to begin with, so of course he failed. The ancestor really was ruthless, but every word she said was right on the mark. Jin began to grow curious about the title of Holy Knight, as well as the vast world outside. At the same time, in a deserted forest, an urgent report was delivered to the commander on horseback. The giant monster had been taken down far too quickly. The commander asked skeptically if that was truly the case. The female scout confirmed it with certainty, and said she was on her way back to report to the guild master. The commander fell into thought. He had believed it could not be defeated without a holy knight, so he had come here on his own before the guild gave orders. He never expected someone had already dealt with the monster completely. Just as the girl was still cheerfully talking about that unexpected coincidence, a terrifying monster suddenly shot out from behind her, about to lunge forward and attack. In that very instant, the commander swung his sword and unleashed a fatal strike, cutting the creature down right before her eyes. Looking closely at the monster that had just collapsed, he remarked coldly, "If what you said is true, then this is indeed interesting." Then he gave a mysterious smile and said they should meet him and see how strong he truly was. Gentle morning sunlight fell over the peaceful village, while Jin stood high above. On the balcony, he looked into the distance and sighed that it was a beautiful morning. The air was fresh and pleasantly clear. Before the deep green mountains and the soft winding river, he thought with emotion that he had never expected to see such a beautiful scene with his own eyes one day. In that quiet moment, Jin's heart suddenly ached as he remembered his old partner. If only Kagura could see this view with him as well. Just then, Sandy timidly approached from behind, holding a stack of clothes in her arms as she softly called out to the guardian deity, "These clothes, please change into them." Jin quickly put on the new outfit, then prepared with everyone for the long journey ahead. At the village exit, the old woman kindly reminded Hakama to do her duty as their guide well. The little girl answered politely that she understood. Beside them, Sax crossed his arms in regret, having hoped to learn many things from the guardian deity. The old woman immediately reminded him to focus on his studies first, making Sax grumble that she talked too much. Seeing that, Jin stepped over to encourage Sax. He said Sax's teleportation technique yesterday was not bad, then smiled and promised to meet him at the royal capital. Being acknowledged by the guardian deity moved Sax so deeply that he was left speechless. Clenched his fist tightly and declared in a clear voice that he would definitely go there and would do his utmost in his studies. Hakama's father stepped forward and entrusted his daughter to Jin, asking him to look after the little girl. He knelt down and embraced Hama, gently telling his daughter that all she needed was to take good care of her health. After saying goodbye to the villagers, Jin slung his backpack over his shoulder and firmly said he was setting off. He waved to everyone one last time, then officially left the village with Hakama. The two passed through the dense forest, following a small stream beside the road. Their journey continued across untouched lands beside long rivers stretching into the distance. When dusk descended, they stopped to rest beside a magnificent waterfall, where white foam sprayed up endlessly. The next morning, as the first light of day had just appeared, Hakama excitedly pointed ahead, leading Jin deeper into the layered mountains toward the imperial capital. Night fell beside the flickering fire deep in the forest. Jin softly asked how far it still was from here to the royal capital. Hakama replied that if they walked at an easy pace, they would arrive in about 4 days. Jin silently felt that the distance was shorter than he had expected. Seeing Jin deep in thought, Hakama curiously asked why he wanted to understand this world so much. Jin only smiled and said it was a secret, making the little girl even more curious about his reticence. Jin's gaze grew distant as he recalled Kagura once insisting that the corrupted ones had not yet been completely destroyed. That was indeed not wrong. They still existed in this era. However, they normally only multiplied in heavily polluted environments. Thinking back on everything that had happened, Jin feared that some terrifying change was certainly unfolding in secret. That change caused monsters to appear even in pristine places. The ancestors' intuition had already caught the scent of something unusual. Hakama looked Jin anxiously and blurted out that the guardian deity looked very frightening right now. Jin suddenly snapped back to himself. He softened his voice and apologized, saying he had merely been absorbed in thinking about a few things. He told himself that at least in this era, humans were still living and had not yet been controlled by the corrupted ones. First, he needed to know how the people of this era dealt with them, while the true nature of the corrupted ones could be studied later. Hakama hesitantly asked what she should call him. Jin replied to simply call him Jin, then reminded the little girl to drop the title because it sounded rather tiring. Suddenly, the rapid pounding of horse hooves rang out, tearing through the quiet night. A fully equipped group of cavalry suddenly appeared before them. The commander leading them, clad in gleaming armor, spoke up to apologize for disturbing the two during their rest, then asked for a few minutes to talk. Before the sudden appearance of the cavalry unit, Jin still sat calmly beside the fire and asked who they were. The blonde commander, wearing resplendent white armor, introduced them in a clear voice as the Holy Knights of the royal capital. He was August Anton, captain of the 7th Division. Hearing the words Holy Knights, Jin softly repeated them as if thinking. He glanced at the cavalry behind August and realized this was the very force the old woman had once mentioned. Seeing Jin still calmly sitting there drinking water, with no intention of standing to greet them, Karina, the female knight accompanying August, instantly flew into a rage. She ground her teeth and snapped that showing such an attitude before their captain was far too rude. At the very least, he should stand up and greet him. What an insolent wretch. This girl was clearly a die-hard fan of her captain. Although Karina was brimming with killing intent and insisted that the two were highly suspicious, August remained composed. He told his subordinate to step back, then dismounted and politely apologized to Jin for speaking while still seated on horseback, asking if they could have a brief exchange. Jin stood up, his sharp cold gaze fixed straight on August, then asked about the implication behind Karina's words just now. August tactfully apologized on behalf of his subordinate for her rude attitude, but he quickly got to the point as well, asking Jin to answer where they had come from and where they planned to go next. Hakama was kneeling on the ground at this moment and answered honestly that they came from Kodama village and were on their way to the royal capital. Upon hearing the name Kodama village, August could not hide his surprise. Meanwhile, Karina still stubbornly insisted that the two were lying. She leapt down from her horse, drew her sword and pointed it at Jin, then shouted angrily that the birth records in Kodama village did not contain any inferior race. Now everything has been exposed, you lowly race. This girl really did seem a little deluded about her own power. Jin was briefly surprised, but inwardly he marveled that this world's management system was extremely strict, no different from the modern era. However, August immediately spoke up to stop his subordinate. He pointed to the clothes Hakama was wearing and explained it to Karina. The outfit that little girl is wearing is a specialty of the Kodama region, known as Kodama silk clothing. Even in the capital, this kind of silk was sold at a very high price because it was premium attire. August judged that children's clothing made from Kodama silk was extremely rare, so the possibility that the little girl truly came from Kodama village was high. Even so, his eyes suddenly turned cold and full of suspicion as they shifted toward Jin. August slowly drew his sword from its sheath. The gleaming tip of the sword pointed straight ahead, while the person standing there looked far too unusual. The clothes you are wearing look strange. What country are you from in the end? He continued interrogating them in a pressure-filled voice, saying that on the road from Kodama village to the royal capital, many robberies caused by bandits had occurred. They often used children to steal goods, and this situation looked very much like the two of them right now. August stated clearly that those robbers often pretended to be innocent to hide their actions. Hakama hurriedly explained that we'd nothing at all. However, August still replied coldly, that is for us to judge. Before the threat coming from the squad of knights, Hakama suddenly released her power, and brilliant blue currents of electricity covered her entire body. August immediately narrowed his eyes and warned her, do not even think of trying anything here. At that moment, he was briefly startled when he sensed the energy radiating from Hakama. I did not expect you to possess divine power. At a glance, you indeed have no small amount of potential. Standing beside her, Jin silently observed the other party and thought to himself, so this is a holy knight. I understand now, he truly is quite... August poured divine power into his sword, causing the blade to emit a brilliant and dignified light. Pointing the sword tip close to Jin's face, August lowered his voice and pressed him, answer me at once, where exactly are you from? He issued his final warning in an icy tone, your testimony will decide whether I execute you right here or not. Jin still stood motionless, his deep blue eyes looking straight at the other man, not revealing even the slightest trace of fear. After a long leisurely breath, Jin calmly replied, from Kodama village, that is all, why ask so much? The answer made Karina cry out in shock, but then she immediately denied it with an irritated expression. That is clearly a lie. Contrary to his subordinate's impatience, August unexpectedly sheathed his sword and said thoughtfully, I understand. Karina asked in confusion, Captain, why are you letting him go? August turned to look at Hakama and asked once more to confirm, you are certain you are not lying? With a resolute gaze, the little girl stated clearly that Jin truly was the guardian god of our Kodama village. The title guardian god made August unable to hide his surprise. He quietly repeated it with doubt, then murmured, so that is how it is. At this point, Jin finally spoke up and cut off the other man's train of thought. Are you done with your questions? August nodded, admitting that he was. After that, he decisively mounted his horse, signaled the cavalry to prepare to leave, and left behind an apology. I hope the two of you will overlook our rudeness just now. From atop his horse, August asked whether Jin and Hakama were also heading to the capital. When Jin confirmed it, he smiled meaningfully. Then we will certainly meet again. Before leaving, August even generously said that if they encountered trouble in the future, they could come find him, as an apology for what happened today. That offer shocked Karina beyond belief. Captain, are you serious? Without waiting for her to react, August spurred his horse away, while Karina hurriedly chased after him. Jin stood silently in the night. He calmly watched the knight's figures gradually disappear into the distance. On the way away, Karina shouted resentfully, why did you retreat? No matter how I look at it, that lowborn man is extremely suspicious. August still wore a contemplative expression, quietly repeating his subordinate's words as though weighing them. A lowborn man, is he? Looking straight ahead, August said coldly, we still do not know who the prey is. Karina asked back in shock, what did you say? Even the senior female knight Ria nodded in agreement, making her even more stunned. Ria turned to look at Karina with a serious gaze and asked, you still have not realized it. It is the overwhelming gap in power between us and that man. August recalled that tense confrontation and revealed, I intended to test him 2 or 3 times, but he was always ready to counter before I could even move. The very instant August was about to draw his sword, Jin had reacted so quickly that he completely overwhelmed him. That made the captain unable to launch any attack at all, even if he wanted to. Ria asked back in horror, Captain, you used divine power. When August confirmed it, he added bitterly, before I could do anything, the divine power had already gone out completely. Karina was utterly frozen when she heard the captain explain that he had once intended to use his power to suppress Jin just as he had done with Hakama, but all the spirits refused to grant him power at the same time. Ria also turned pale and admitted that she had experienced the same thing, making Karina tremble as she realized a terrifying truth was becoming clear. August thoughtfully judged that the difference in sacred power between the two sides was far too vast. He thought to himself, to create a miracle like that, perhaps in this entire order of knights, only the Grand Commander-in-Chief would be capable of standing equal to Jin. Karina still could not recover from her shock. She confessed in a trembling voice, "Why could I not sense anything at all?" August calmly explained that the person was an abnormal existence to begin with, and besides, she had only joined the order not long ago. As the night sped through the night, one member suddenly spoke up. That person asked, "Then was the one who took down the invading creature actually him?" August believed that was highly likely. Karina remained uneasy, afraid it was too dangerous to let them go, but the captain decided to secretly observe them for now, since they had not shown malice. August decisively ordered them to return to the capital. The monster incident had ended sooner than expected, and the bandits would be left to the guild to handle. He also reminded Karina that she should train her character instead of focusing only on strength. August's mind still could not stop thinking about the guardian god of Kodama village. Looking toward the brightly lit capital, he quietly assessed him. If that person became an ally, he could be the key to solving the most difficult problem the kingdom was facing. The next morning, Jin and Hakama continued on their way beneath the brilliant sunlight. Jin smiled faintly, telling himself that yesterday's encounter had truly been interesting. Hakama curiously asked whether all the knights in the capital were as strong as them. Jin lightly shook his head. He replied that they were not. They were special cases. The Holy Knights were an elite force chosen with great care, and the two from yesterday ranked among the finest. Jin remarked that in truth, they were merely more skilled at using nano, while Hakama blankly asked about spirit arts. Jin explained that it was the art of summoning elemental spirits to borrow their power. He understood that the spirits of this era were actually the familiar nanoparticles, while science in their eyes had become fantasy. Watching Hakama walk along cheerfully, Jin suddenly remembered Sak's contemptuous words and wondered, "And that matter of inferior races too, is it?" He chuckled softly and let out a comment, "Ha, looks like countless different races coexist in this era." Hakama nodded in confirmation, then explained according to what her grandmother had once told her. Because living environments had long since shrunk, human bodies gradually changed to adapt to the places where they survived. That was what gave rise to many different races, such as merfolk or the insect race Jin was imagining. This little girl really does have quite a deep understanding of sociology. Jin pondered, thinking that if this evolution had originated from environmental influence, then that meant there were still survivors from 100 million years ago, who had gradually evolved into their current forms. He temporarily set those vague thoughts aside and asked Hakama, "So those who did not evolve are called inferior?" The little girl nodded sadly, "Yes, that is why society looks down on them and treats them as backward people who failed to adapt." Hakama also revealed that most people sold as slaves belonged to the inferior group. Jin was stunned to learn that slavery still existed in this world. Even so, Hakama still held firmly to her own thoughts. The little girl believed that, in truth, there was no great difference between them. Abusing others just because they were slightly different from the majority was completely wrong. Faced with that kind heart, Jin smiled and praised the little girl. "You truly are a good child." Suddenly, a strange sound rang out, interrupting their conversation from the direction of the bushes. From the broad thicket, a weak voice sounded out with desperate urgency, "Save me." A blue-haired boy, his body covered in wounds, staggered into view before them. His body was covered in injuries, his steps faltered, and he collapsed right in front of them. Hakama rushed over in panic to check on him. "Are you all right?" Meanwhile, Jin's gaze suddenly paused as he carefully observed the boy's features. He looked at the bruised body and faint breathing of the one who had just collapsed. When he looked at the boy's hands, Jin was secretly shocked. Those were not the beastfolk hands commonly seen in this era, but strangely complete human hands. Hakama worriedly supported the stranger, who was gasping for breath. As for Jin, he quietly observed the bruises covering the other party's body. He realized those injuries were quite serious, so he stepped closer, his hand radiating a gentle blue light. "Endure it for a moment, I will treat you right away." But in that instant, the injured person's gaze suddenly turned sharp and cold. She abruptly sprang up, one hand clamping tightly around Hakama's neck while pressing a knife close to the little girl's throat. She growled in threat, "Do not move, take even one step, and I will do it at once." With acting this dramatic, Oscar should be calling your name. Facing the urgent situation, Jin remained strangely calm. He said softly, "So that is how it is, we carelessly fell into your trap." Looking at the fierce expression of the one holding the hostage, Jin silently understood that her accomplices were surely hiding somewhere nearby. From within the hazy mist, a figure gradually emerged, proving that someone was indeed coordinating with her very smoothly. A burly man with a scruffy beard stepped out with a rough bearing and spoke in praise. "You completed the mission very well. You carried out the order with absolute precision." Jin quickly realized this was a camouflage invisibility technique, using nanoparticles to capture the surroundings and conceal the user. Though it was easy to leave traces while moving, this group still operated it with extreme skill to surround him. The man looked Jin over from head to toe and sneered, "An inferior creature like you is dressed rather sharply. What country are you from?" The leader pointed the tip of his sword at Jin's chest and threatened through gritted teeth, "Stay calm, do not foolishly move. You know full well what will happen if you act rashly." Behind them, Hakama was still being restrained by Pogoryu, the cold blade pressed close to the little girl's neck. In despair, the little girl shouted, "Save me, Lord Jin." Immediately afterward, a radiant surge of blue divine power burst forth, making Pogoryu cry out in shock. Seeing that, Jin shouted the little girl's name in panic, but Hakama could only tremble before the brutality of these people. Jin kept a cold expression and warned in a low voice that this kind of power was never meant to be used on humans. "Surely you understand that too." Hakama gasped through her tears, but meanwhile the bandits were extremely excited. One underling laughed with delight, "Boss, this haul is a huge profit. Who would have thought that little brat had divine power too?" Another burly man approached Jin and pressed him on whether he had similar power. Jin only answered coldly, "Who knows," making that man snap in anger. "What did you say?" Without giving Jin time to react, the burly man delivered a powerful kick to his back, then threw out a mocking remark. "Do not get so cocky, you lowly creature." Witnessing that scene, Hakama screamed in pain. The leader hurriedly stopped him for fear of damaging the valuable goods, but the underling scornfully insisted that an inferior like Jin was not worth much money. Suspicion rose in the leader's mind, as he could not understand how a bunch of lowly creatures could possess that divine power. Hakama was shocked to realize these were the human traffickers, the infamous bandits the Holy Knight had once mentioned. The leader stepped closer, his hand releasing threatening arcs of golden lightning. "Sleep quietly, later you'll become very valuable merchandise." The man intended to use his power to force them into silence. Hakama realized in despair that if they continued to be captured like this, both of them would certainly be sold as slaves. The electricity from the man's hand pressed close to the little girl's face. Hakama jolted awake from her daze at Jin's urgent calls. "Hakama, wake up quickly." Seeing Jin right beside her, the little girl asked in panic, "Lord Jin." Jin checked her worriedly, "Are you hurt anywhere?" Hakama reassured him that she was still fine, but their current situation was what truly worried her. Jin looked around at the cold iron bars and wondered, "Where have we been locked up?" He realized this was the lair of those who had attacked them. Farther away, countless other iron cages were also imprisoning innocent people with despairing faces. Jin observed and thought, then said, "It seems the people they captured are all being held together here." Seeing Jin wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, Hakama asked shyly, "But why are you almost naked like that?" Jin explained calmly, "They stripped me because they thought my clothes were too strange. Luckily, they still left my underwear." The old ancestor really is optimistic in every adversity. Hakama could only fall silent before his calm expression. "How can you still be so composed?" Jin clicked his tongue, because in his previous life, he had already grown used to being naked in the laboratory. Girl hurriedly changed the subject. "Let us put that aside for now. Why did you not fight back earlier?" She believed that with Jin's strength he could easily take down the human traffickers. Faced with Hakama's question, Jin merely stayed silent, his gaze deep and unreadable. Suddenly, the dry sound of a door opening rang out from afar, accompanied by a stranger's urging words, "Hurry up and finish this." The cell door was immediately pushed open. Pogoryu stepped inside, holding a tray of bread in her hands. Seeing that both of them were awake, she said coldly, "So you people have been awake for a while." Hakama roared in fury, "You." Before that anger, Pogoryu only set the food down, her voice heavy. "I do not care that you hate me, because from the very beginning, I never hoped to be forgiven." Standing behind the iron bars, Hakama gritted her teeth and clenched the cage tightly, her eyes brimming with rage. Jin curled his lips slightly and calmly remarked, "You really are far too kind." Those words made Pogoryu freeze kind. Jin thought to himself that a true villain would not waste time caring whether he was hated or forgiven. Jin quietly stood up, pushed the tray of food aside, then said decisively, "All right, let us begin." Under Pogoryu and Hakama's stunned gazes, Jin gripped the iron bars of the cage with his bare hands. He poured strength into his hands and snapped them with ease, as if breaking a few dry branches. Pogoryu's face went pale, unable to believe her eyes as she watched that man calmly step out of the cell. Jin approached Pogoryu and said in a low voice, "I was waiting for you. No one here will be able to eavesdrop on this conversation. You were waiting for me." Before she could steady herself, Jin was already looking straight at her. The question struck her weak point, causing Pogoryu to panic at once. "How did you know that?" Jin calmly replied that it was all just his deduction. He admitted that she had fooled even him at first, because the bruises on her body were all real. But Jin understood that even villains rarely tortured their own companions so cruelly just to exploit them. That was why he realized she was being forced through violence. Pogoryu lowered her head, her shoulders trembling as her pain was laid bare. In the end, she admitted in despair, "My younger brother was taken by them." Pogoryu choked back sobs as she continued recounting her family's tragedy. "As for my parents, they were both brutally killed by those men." That horrifying memory came flooding back, leaving her unable to hold back her tears. she cried out in despair. That is why I have to protect my brother's life at any cost. That is the only reason I did this. Her past was truly tragic, all because she wanted to save her younger brother. Witnessing the young girl's suffering, Hakama could only stand frozen in sorrow. Jin's eyes suddenly darkened, killing intent surging violently. They really are trash. It is time to eradicate evil. Seeing that Jin was still strangely calm, Hakama asked curiously whether he had deliberately allowed himself to be captured in order to save them. Jin did not deny it. That was also part of the plan. He said evil people were stubborn like grease stains. If even one remained, they would spread disaster again. Outside the corridor, the beastman guard heard the strange noise and immediately stopped, probing suspiciously. Before that man could recover, Jin said coldly, "That is why once I decide to destroy them." In the next instant, he unleashed a kick like thunder, sending the heavy wooden door flying straight outside. Door slammed the guard into the opposite wall, knocking him unconscious on the spot. Jin stepped out of the cell with imposing dignity, and declared that they had to be uprooted completely, swept clean without leaving behind any future calamity. 1 billion years ago, in the midst of a brilliant age of civilization filled with skyscrapers and interwoven highways of light, a boy with a face smeared in mud quietly looked at the world and told himself, "I am the same." Looking at the giant screen praising the hero who had once destroyed a notorious drug ring, he thought to himself that he had always longed to enforce justice. Yet not long after, he realized one truth. A world that still needs justice is actually only crawling with scum like you. People like that are multiplying endlessly everywhere. Facing the burly man who was gripping his collar tightly, the boy only thought in silence. If I could live an ordinary life, that would surely be ideal, but the circumstances of my upbringing would not allow it. Therefore, he chose to use strength to resolve everything. In the blink of an eye, he bent the arm of the man restraining him, leaving the surrounding henchmen frozen in terror. With blue eyes blazing with killing intent, he declared coldly, "Clean up these insects at once." Then he charged in and struck down that scum without the slightest mercy, not only defeating them, but also wanting to erase them completely. Just like that, Jin gradually swept away every piece of scum that dared stand in his way. He sat quietly atop the summit of the defeated until one day, someone came to him and said that he had been born into the wrong world. That person was Kagura, the one who reached out a hand and opened an entirely new destiny for him. Back in the present, even without weapons or armor, Jin still radiated overwhelming killing intent as he calmly dragged the bandit across the floor. Seeing that scene, the beastman guards hurriedly blocked his path and shouted, "Stop right there." Yet in the blink of an eye, all of them were taken down by him. One man lay sprawled on the floor groaning, "What do you want?" Another leaned against the wall, trembling, unable to understand how he had gotten all the way in here. What answered their horror was only Jin's cold, mysterious smile. He swung his leg and unleashed a thunderous kick, sending one guard flying into the air. Jin moved as fast as a ghost, unleashing powerful blows in succession that left the bandits completely unable to react. One man was grabbed tightly by him, his face clearly showing utter shock. The remaining men could only stand frozen, helplessly watching their comrades be overwhelmed. The cornered guard trembled and screamed, wondering what kind of monster Jin really was. Jin still strode forward with his solid frame, making the remaining men could only scream in panic as they faced a power that was almost impossible to stop. A miserable scream echoed throughout the dungeon, leaving everyone imprisoned there stunned and trembling. Pogoru's face turned deathly pale, and she thought to herself that the scream just now was unable to hide her astonishment. She asked Hama who that companion of hers really was. Hakama calmly replied, "Have you never seen the ancestoric action before? He is a guardian deity." Before Pogoru's stunned expression, the little girl affirmed once more that Jin truly was a god. "Just leave it to Lord Jin. He will definitely handle everything properly." Hakama urged Pogoru to act at once. For now, follow Jin's words and get everyone out of here. Pogoru was still doubtful and asked whether they could really escape. She anxiously reminded her that the leader possessed an extremely vast source of holy power. With muscle strength alone, there was no way he could possibly defeat him. Yet at this moment, the leader himself was trembling as he backed inward, desperately begging Jin to wait. Jin strode forward, restraining the guard with one hand, and coldly asked what his leader was craving. Money, was it? The leader stammered in denial, then hurriedly forced a conciliatory smile that looked utterly cowardly. He pointed toward the iron cage imprisoning Pogoru's younger brother and began to tempt him. "If you like slaves, take them, just spare my life." Jin froze, his blue eyes blazing with killing intent at the human trafficker's disgusting offer. He looked at the leader sitting collapsed on the floor, beside his subordinates who had completely lost the ability to resist. Jin coldly asked whether he had finished saying everything he wanted to say. The leader trembled violently, sweat pouring off him under the terrifying pressure radiating from Jin. He wondered in panic what was going on and why his holy spell had no effect at all. That man looked up at Jin in terror, stammering hopelessly. As he trembled and retreated, he screamed inwardly, wondering what kind of damnable energy this man possessed. He was about to die, yet he was still busy wondering. Jin stepped closer with contempt and said he was nothing but a half-baked villain. Truly formidable enemies would choose to run away from the very beginning. But someone like you always looks down on his opponent and firmly believes he will win. Once you taste defeat, you start begging pathetically. Having been struck where it hurt, the leader gnashed his teeth in resentment, sweat streaming down his face as he hissed with rage. He suddenly sprang up, frantically rushed toward the end of the room, and shouted that if things had come to this, he had no other choice. He screamed wildly, his trembling hands gripping the lever tightly. This is not over yet. The moment the lever was pulled down, a dry, heavy sound rang out. The heavy iron door slowly opened, revealing a massive black shadow behind it. The leader smugly boasted that he had specially obtained this thing at someone's request. A gigantic mutated monster with rough purple skin and bulging muscles stepped out and made the stone floor tremble. Most horrifying of all was the mouth full of sharp teeth in the middle of its chest, radiating a blazing red killing aura. The leader laughed triumphantly, saying that if sweet words did not work, he would make Jin become utterly miserable. At its master's command, the monster roared fiercely and raised high. Its massive arm smashed down on Jin's position like a thunderbolt. A tremendous explosion rang out, but Jin was not crushed. He stopped that heavy punch with his bare hand, still standing firm as a mountain amid the shock. Witnessing that impossible scene, the leader could only gape, his eyes bulging wide in astonishment. The ancestor really was overwhelming. Amid the cloud of dust and smoke, Jin calmly looked straight at him and said that he had been born with a body. Extraordinary. Jin braced himself against the monster's punch, inwardly thinking that compared with ordinary people, his body probably possessed far more muscle fibers. He unleashed a powerful kick, sending the monster flying far from its position. Looking at the grotesque creature growling before him, he spoke softly in disdain. "Is that all?" He gathered his strength and declared that he would also use holy power, then fired a massive blue pillar of light that swallowed the monster whole and completely erased it. The leader collapsed to the floor, trembling in disbelief when he saw that Jin could also use such overwhelming divine power. In that case, Jin strode closer, stood proudly before him, and spoke coldly. "So then, now what do you plan to do next?" The leader was drenched in sweat, his face twisted by utter fear. He stammered in despair. He clasped his hands and begged pitifully, hoping Jin would turn a blind eye this time. Arrogant at first, now kneeling and begging for mercy. The only answer to that plea was a cold reply, "I cannot." Without the slightest hesitation, Jin unleashed a thunderous punch straight into the leader's face, shattering the last of the human trafficker's arrogance. After dealing with that pile of trash, Jin quickly found his familiar clothes again and spoke softly. "Good, I finally found my outfit." He continued walking forward. As he reached the iron cages holding the pitiful people captive, Jin's gaze softened. He reassured them to wait just a little longer. He would soon get everyone out of here. Looking at the faint, hopeful smiles of the children, Jin understood that he could not simply save them and leave. He walked to the leader's desk and searched through the documents with a stern face. Before leaving this place, he still had a few matters to investigate clearly. If he could not gather evidence of their crimes, all of this would not mean much. Suddenly, he froze when he saw a strange sheet of paper, then realized that this thing looked extremely suspicious. Jin stared intently at the unfamiliar characters on the page, then told himself that he understood. But immediately afterward, he looked embarrassed again, as if his head were filled with question marks. What exactly did these lines say? He could not understand a single word. He sighed when he realized he was illiterate in this new era. Perhaps he would ask Hakama to teach him how to read the current language. Stepping past the leader lying miserably on the floor, Jin still wondered about the human traffickers' true purpose. What were they planning to do after capturing the corrupted? To find the answer, he placed his hand on a material surface, activating a blue glow from advanced nanotechnology. It was time to uncover the truth. "I will access the images from the nanobots drifting around this area." Countless virtual screens appeared before Jin, reconstructing the visual data that had once been recorded. The images from within the past week were definitely still stored here. In the footage, a finely dressed man bowed respectfully and asked the noble figure how they should deal with the large haul. The one standing opposite only replied coldly that it was not something he needed to concern himself with. The man in the recording gave a mysterious smile, his gaze sharp and cold as he hinted that something interesting was about to happen in this nation. Jin silently watched the entire conversation through the virtual screen, his expression turning grave at the premonition of a major upheaval. Leaving the dark basement, they stepped into a bustling town lined with tall buildings in a classical style. A green-haired boy, filthy all over, rushed over in panic and shouted joyfully, "Big sister." Recognizing him as a younger brother, Pogaru cried out the boy's name in emotion, "Nino." The two siblings hugged each other tightly after many days apart. Nino choked back tears, silently giving thanks that his sister was still safe. Bawaru turned to Jin, bowed his head to express his deep gratitude, and thanked him repeatedly. Faced with such reverence, Jin only answered calmly that he was simply someone who happened to pass by. Jin observed the surroundings and asked if the people in red uniforms were the Lord's subordinates. Hakama explained that they were from the association. The little girl pointed toward the man with the large ram horns who was taking notes, saying that he was the town association's president. Seeing Jin appear, the association president immediately approached with a face full of surprise. He asked whether Jin was the one who had resolved this incident, and he firmly nodded in confirmation. Ram-horned association president bowed respectfully and introduced himself as Padoraku, while sincerely thanking Jin for stepping in to help. Those horns looked truly impressive, but beneath his courteous manner, Padoraku could not hide his shock as he observed Jin. He thought to himself that this person had faced many enemies without a single scratch, ordinary in appearance yet certainly anything but ordinary. Padoraku explained that the association had recently been under great pressure because of many requests to eliminate bandit groups that had caused heavy losses. Hearing this, Jin wondered whether the Lord was not like the police. Padoraku hurriedly explained that the Lord did not have that much authority. He said that those with the right to handle criminals of this kind were association members, a force that had sworn loyalty to the king. Even if Lord Sebian committed a crime, the association would still have to report it to His Majesty, though Padoraku believed such a thing was unlikely. Jin silently compared it to 22nd century concepts. The Lord was like a mayor, while the association was nearly a police force. Even so, the image of someone filled with ambition still lingered in his mind. The name Sabian made it impossible for Jin to take things lightly. He took out a scroll and asked whether the documents obtained from them would be of any use to Padoraku. The moment he saw the contents inside, Padoraku was shaken and blurted out, "This is..." Trembling, he realized it was a list of those secretly trading with the bandits, evidence enough for the association to seize the entire network. Jin immediately asked straight to the point whether the local lord's name was on that list. Seeing Padoraku freeze in shock, Jin instantly tried to smooth things over. He told him not take that joke seriously. Padoraku confirmed that it was not there, but Jin had already begun silently considering it. Jin gradually understood everything, realizing the other party was indeed a highly skilled villain, while for now he could do nothing more. He looked toward the siblings Pogaru and Nino, his heart troubled over the fate of the slaves who had just been rescued. Padoraku said the association would send those whose identities could be verified back to their hometowns, but they were helpless with those of unknown origin. Jin thought the two children had lost their parents, so he asked about a place that cared for orphans, but Padoraku sighed and said there was none here. Seeing the children's sorrowful expressions, Jin could not help wondering what kind of association could be so strange. An idea suddenly came to Jin, and he asked the siblings whether they want to go to a proper place to work. Pogaru and Nino immediately agreed with eyes full of hope, making Hakama ask in surprise whether Jin already had somewhere in mind. Jin curved his lips in a faint, mysterious smile and answered with certainty that he did. He recalled what Captain August had once said, "If you ever run into trouble later, come find me." With a cold, sharp smile, Jin believed he had found an extremely suitable place for the siblings. At the same time, at August's mansion in the capital of the Kingdom of Kamoja, the nightly party returned after a long journey beneath the early morning sun. As he rode into the mansion courtyard, August suddenly stopped, stunned as though he had sensed an ill omen. Faced with the concern of the female knight Ria, he only said he had suddenly felt a chill down his spine for no clear reason. August dismounted with a solemn bearing. He firmly declared that the long expedition had now officially come to an end. He thanked everyone and reminded them all to rest properly. August entered the magnificent mansion amid the warm welcome of the servants, who all bowed together to greet their master's return. The moment he had handed his gear over to the butler, August quickly asked at once whether there had been any new reports lately. Seeing the butler's awkward expression and the beads of sweat dotting his face, he paused, then asked suspiciously what exactly had happened to make him so tense. Butler bowed his head and apologized for disturbing him just as he had returned, but August responded calmly. He told him not to mind it, then quietly listened to the confidential information being reported. From the high balcony above, a woman with a sharp, cold gaze was silently watching their conversation. After listening, August pondered for a moment, then nodded slightly and thanked the butler for the report. August bowed his head in deep concern, realizing the actual situation was far more serious than he had once thought. He was stunned, wondering how an invader could slip in and attack right in the heart of the heavily guarded capital. His suspicion gradually grew, and August became certain that someone had deliberately released that monster to cause chaos. What worried him most was the ban on unauthorized people entering Hanik's academy. August understood that he needed to find trustworthy allies soon to deal with the forces lurking in the shadows. Meanwhile, on a crowded street corner, Jin, Hakama, and the Pogaru sisters waved goodbye to Chairman Padoraku and the guild staff before setting off for the royal capital. Your great ancestor is now leading his disciples to join the guild brothers. 3 days had passed since the operation to wipe out the bandits, and the group continued tirelessly toward the royal capital. Along the way, Pogaru asked worriedly whether there really was any work in the capital suited for someone like her. Jin smiled and reassured her that Pogaru could read and write, and was good at arithmetic, so she would definitely find work. He advised her to believe in herself. Hearing that, Pogaru brightened and replied yes. Suddenly, Hakama cried out in excitement. The little girl happily pointed ahead. Jin, look, we have arrived. From afar, the kingdom's capital appeared dazzling beneath the sunlight, making even Jin exclaim in amazement that the capital was truly magnificent. When he entered the city, Jin could not help being overwhelmed by how crowded and bustling the place was. Hakama explained that the capital depended heavily on imported goods, so products from all over flowed here. Even the villagers of Kodama often traveled a long way to sell local specialties, something Jin had heard before. Jin silently judged this to be an interesting place, where many races and civilizations gathered together, from insect folk to even merfolk. He realized it was only natural for such a culturally diverse place to flourish. This city was not only clean, it also had a fairly orderly management system. The security here also appeared to be very well controlled at a glance. Jin's gaze suddenly turned cold and sharp. He realized that behind that splendor, there was still a dark side, where the destitute huddled in the damp corners of the capital. Observing those hidden corners, Jin thought to himself that perhaps every era had its own problems. He turned to ask Hakama when she would enroll, and she quickly answered that it would be next week. Jin nodded, calculating that they still had some time to prepare. Hakama added that enrollment would take place after the exams ended. Behind them, an elegant blonde young lady secretly observed them through her fan, thinking with contempt that a brat who wanted to enter Hans Academy was actually accompanied by a man of a lowly race. When dusk fell, the group stopped at a decent inn in the city. As soon as they entered the room, Nino and Hakama jumped up in delight. Hakama breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, a soft bed to lie on. This feels wonderful. Jin sat down on the bed and quietly agreed. He rested his chin on his hand and thought. The group had finally reached the kingdom's capital, so what should he do next? Looking at the bag of gold coins in his hand, Jin told himself that no matter what, he still needed money to live in this era. He remembered the reward for eliminating the bandits, but he also understood that money could not last forever. Moreover, Jin still had to share it with the slaves and find stable work for the Pogaru sisters. The image of Captain August briefly surfaced in his mind. Jin thought meeting him would be the fastest way, but without an introduction, it would probably be difficult to meet him right away. Jin sat quietly in the room, resting his chin on his hand as he calculated that first, he should investigate more carefully the corrupted ones of this era. He felt uneasy knowing that someone was plotting to use them for their own dark purposes. To Jin, the corrupted ones were a terrifying threat, and they absolutely could not be allowed to continue running rampant freely. Looking out at the dazzling scenery of the capital beyond the window, Jin silently made up his mind. He would definitely not let that scum cause chaos again. Jin asked Hakama what people in this country usually did when they wanted to learn about or research something. The little girl answered calmly that they would find someone to teach them, or look it up themselves in books. But books here were very expensive, so back then, Kodama village had only a few shared copies. Hakama's eyes suddenly lit up when she mentioned the large library in the capital. Hearing that, Jin was secretly delighted, thinking that if he could make good use of that place, perhaps he could find clues about the research facilities Kagura had left behind. However, Jin's hope was quickly extinguished when the female librarian politely refused. She explained that books were national assets, not something anyone could use freely, and access was limited to certain groups. Those permitted to enter included students, instructors with recognized ability, and nobles living in the capital. Jin could only fall silent before that harsh reality, and what shocked him even more was that from the very beginning, he still could not read. Jin ruefully told himself, right, he still could not read. Although he had recently been taught and had practiced writing, he still needed more time to master this language. Standing amid the bustling streets, he raised a hand to his forehead and sighed, troubled over what he should do next. In a hidden corner, two figures in hooded cloaks silently watched Jin and the children, confirming that he was the one of a low-grade species traveling with them. One of them suddenly approached from behind and spoke in a provocative voice, asking whether Jin had time for a little fight. The moment Jin turned around, the beastman with wolf ears threw a thunderous punch straight at his face. But Jin merely tilted his head slightly, then stopped that attack easily with one hand. He coldly asked if this was what they called a little fight. Looking straight at his opponent, Jin mocked that their way of greeting people was truly special, making him take back his assessment of this place's security. Jin lightly held the gray-haired beastman's fist in place, causing him to exclaim in shock that he had made a huge mistake. He gave a low laugh, saying Jin's instincts were pretty sharp, but everything had only just begun. In the middle of the crowded street, a violent surge of energy suddenly erupted. The surrounding people fled in panic. Hakama was shocked to see that they dared to use divine power right in the center of the city. Facing the attacker, Jin coldly asked their purpose. The beastman curled his lips and replied that someone found the lot of them extremely unpleasant to look at. Jin glanced at his opponent, silently understanding that someone had hired them to come here. Yet, instead of feeling afraid, Jin merely gave a faint calculated calculating smile, because everything was still unfolding exactly as he had expected. The gray-haired beastman continued threatening him. "Get out of here now if you do not want to die." He and his companions laughed with delight, while Jin calmly replied that he would consider it when things truly became dangerous. That dogman immediately swung his fist and charged forward. The moment the attack was launched, his wrist was seized tightly by Jin. The underling blurted out in confusion, "What the hell is going on?" Immediately afterward, his entire body was slammed hard into the ground. Seeing his companion taken down, the red-haired beastman roared in fury, "You bastard." He poured all his divine power into both hands. A blazing burst of fire flared up, then he charged straight toward Jin. Even so, Jin remained perfectly calm. He raised a nano shield and easily blocked the attack. For the astonished eyes of the attacker, Jin abruptly closed in, tightened one hand around his neck, and reminded him in a cold voice, "Remember to be careful." He lifted him into the air, leaving that man completely unable to fight back. Jin looked straight into the frightened eyes of the red-haired man and said coldly, "If you want to fight me, train more, kid." He tightened his grip, then asked whether that man still had enough nerve to challenge him again. The red-haired beastman trembled in despair, horrified as he realized the man before him absolutely could not be an ordinary low-ranking species. Just then, an imposing voice rang out, interrupting the brawl, "Enough, everyone stand still. Do not move." A female knight with long brown hair tied high stepped out from the crowd, grumbling in irritation that she could not even have peace on her day off. She sternly reprimanded the troublemakers, "You dare fight in the middle of the street like this? I will throw all of you into jail. Prepare yourselves." Seeing the authorities appear, Jin smiled faintly in satisfaction, because his plan to create a bit of commotion and draw attention had finally succeeded. The moment she clearly saw Jin's face, the female knight's expression changed. She pointed at him and shouted in shock, "You are that low-ranking species from the other day." She immediately scolded him with open hostility, "You really have some nerve, causing trouble right after arriving in the capital." Karina swung her weapon and spoke with contempt. "As expected, the inferior will always remain inferior. You should at least know what may be done and what must be avoided. This temperament of yours seriously needs training at once." Just as she was about to escalate things further, a girl with long rabbit ears suddenly spoke up. Sorry, please let me interrupt for a moment." Girl said she had happened to pass by and had witnessed the entire incident. With a serious expression, she confirmed that Jin and his companion were the ones attacked first. "Therefore, I believe they only acted in self-defense." The unexpected testimony left Karina stunned, frozen in place for several seconds. Jin looked at the beastman lying motionless on the ground and quietly assessed him. He looked very familiar. Karina walked closer to the group that had been knocked down, narrowed her eyes, and asked, "Are you students of Han's Academy?" Recognizing them, she held her head in exasperation, only hoping that young lady was not involved. Jin briefly wondered which young lady she meant, but Karina immediately ordered the whole group to be escorted away and coldly said this was an internal matter. This attempt at covering things up was far too obvious. Jin watched the female knight's retreating figure and asked, "So holy knights have to patrol too? I thought that was the guild's job." Karina explained as she walked that, because the capital was too large, they also had to help maintain order. She even honestly said she had only happened to pass by while looking for snacks. Even so, Karina still shivered inwardly as she glanced at Jin, silently admitting that this person truly possessed formidable strength. On the other side, Jin also silently judged that the students who had just faced him were not ordinary. Karina was about to turn away, but still did not forget to warn him not to cause trouble in this capital. At that moment, Jin called out to stop her. "Wait, if you do not mind, I want you to take me somewhere." Somewhere. The sudden request left the female knight stunned. "You want me to take you somewhere?" The destination Jin had in mind was August's magnificent mansion that very night. Sitting across from the captain of the Holy Knights, Jin clasped his hands together and spoke bluntly, "Hire us." Before August's stunned expression, Jin leisurely repeated that when they met, had he not told him to come if he needed help? August observed him and asked whether this matter even brought his family along, and Jin calmly explained that it was merely an incidental development. He said the group had run into the very band of bandits August had warned them about, and because he saw the children imprisoned, he had stepped in to save them. August anxiously asked what happened to the bandits, and Jin simply replied lightly that he had taught them a lesson they would never forget. After that, I handed the rest over to the guild to handle. August fell into thought, unable to keep terror from rising in his heart as he imagined Jin taking down that infamous bandit gang alone. He wondered why Jin had decided to help these children. Jin looked at the siblings Pogaru and Dap, then said they had no family left. "They are inferior in your eyes, so I want to try finding them work." August remained doubtful, thinking that Jin had no responsibility to look after the children. Jin affirmed that this was his principle. "Whatever the reason, I saved their lives. Therefore, I will take responsibility to the very end." Jin's bold declaration left both August and Karina frozen in astonishment. Meanwhile, the siblings Pogaru smiled brightly, because they had finally found someone they could truly rely on. August nodded in agreement. "Fine, the two of them may stay and work in this mansion." Hearing that, Pogaru cried out in joy, "Really? However, August's gaze suddenly turned sharp and solemn. He looked straight at Jin and gave his condition for the exchange. I want you to take on the role of instructor. The proposal was so unexpected that Jin could not help being taken aback. In the blink of an eye, Pogaru and Nino had been changed into brand new maid and butler uniforms, looking much neater and more proper. Jin folded his arms as he looked at the siblings' new appearance and commented softly, "Those kids look pretty sharp." The siblings immediately bowed deeply and sincerely thanked Lord August. He merely replied calmly that they did not need to be grateful. Afterward, August sternly instructed the servants in the mansion to train them with full dedication and absolutely not discriminate against them for their inferior status. Before that firm command, all the servants bowed and obeyed. The group left to continue their plan. Pogaru and Nino stood in the distance, emotionally waving and repeatedly offering their thanks. Walking beside August, Jin went straight to the point. "This instructor proposal definitely has a hidden purpose, right?" August smiled, admitting that his perceptiveness would be very useful. He confessed in a low voice that although he still did not know Jin's background, he still wanted to believe Jin was the right person to entrust with this matter. August looked toward the magnificent architecture of Hannes Academy submerged in the night, and revealed the true mission. "I want you to secretly investigate inside Hannes Academy." Jin fell briefly into thought, then wondered to himself what exactly is going on here. August spoke in a deep voice about the shifting political situation. This kingdom is about to fall into chaos. When Jin asked about the absence of a ruler, August bitterly revealed that the king was gravely ill and had little time left. Because of that, the struggle for the right of succession had already begun quietly in the shadows. He emphasized that the most difficult problem was that there were dark forces with no claim to the throne at all, yet they were plotting to seize the entire kingdom. August revealed in a low voice that they were using illegal invaders, dragging innocent people into their vicious scheme. Jin listened silently and understood that the local lord was not the only one who needed punishment. Those dangerous people were still hiding and operating right in the middle of the bustling capital. August affirmed that the group had to quickly locate their lair to prevent future disaster. Jin looked at the captain and asked, "The most suspicious place is Han's Academy, is it not?" August smiled faintly and confirmed, "That is right." August walked up to a room, knocked on the door, then stepped inside decisively. "I am coming in." He said there would be someone to guide Jin and help him infiltrate the academy as smoothly as possible. August introduced her. "Let me introduce you. My younger sister is currently studying at Hans, Milia Anton." Sitting on the sofa with an elegant air, Milia half closed her fan and looked at the group who had just entered with a cold, sharp gaze. Seeing her older brother with strangers, she murmured, "This is, dear brother." "That look, it seems war is coming, brother." The moment she saw Jin, Milia could not hide her disdain. "Are you intending to entrust the secret mission from the other day to this lowborn man?" August immediately shouted to correct his younger sister's attitude. "Milia, you are being truly rude." But the young lady stubbornly replied, "What is rude about it? Is the existence of lowborn creatures not the real problem?" Milia believed that even before mentioning the little girl with him, an important mission absolutely could not be entrusted to someone as inferior as Jin. Jin quietly observed her and judged inwardly, "She really is a young lady full of prejudice." August broke into a cold sweat and hurriedly apologized. "I am truly sorry. Please do not take her words to heart." Karina, standing beside them, added that Milia was talented, but extremely hostile toward the lower races. Hearing this, Jin glanced at the female knight and mocked her. "You and that young lady really are the same type." Those words left Karina speechless, while Milia folded her fan and questioned her brother in a clear voice. "Do you understand, brother?" She emphasized that this was not merely a simple infiltration mission, because Jin also had to fully assume the role of a true instructor at the academy. "I do not believe a lowborn man has enough ability to teach others, or has he truly obtained all the necessary qualifications already?" Hakama accidentally let slip the harsh truth that Jin could not even read. Jin awkwardly reminded the little girl, "Do not say that out loud." Hearing that, Milia immediately showed contempt. "Then there is nothing more to discuss. He is completely unqualified." But Hakama still firmly defended him, because there were many things only Jin could teach. "Jin is truly more extraordinary than any of us." Milia thoughtfully observed Jin and judged inwardly. "Well, it seems he has enough power to suppress the students and maintain discipline. But becoming an educator requires far more than that. Cannot be done by relying only on that brute strength." Turning to August, who was troubled and remorseful over the students provoking them on the road, "I had guessed that young lady was behind them. I am deeply sorry and will definitely discipline her seriously." Jin only replied calmly, "It was a small matter, I do not mind." After that, Jin went straight to the professional issue. "Then as an instructor, what exactly do you want me to teach?" August answered decisively that it was spirit arts. Based on what I have observed, you are extremely knowledgeable in this field. Am I right? Jin wondered what part he should teach in the end. August reassured him that teaching only the basics would be enough. He named 4 foundational techniques: ignition, electric discharge, ice formation, and healing. Then he affirmed that if Jin could perform even 2 of those 4 basic techniques, he would already meet the requirement. Jin asked in surprise, "That is all? Is it that simple?" Those words immediately made August panic. He said, "What do you mean that is all? Do not tell me you can use all of those special spirit arts that only a very few people can perform." Jin suddenly realized an amusing truth: magic in this era is actually considered elite. He curled his lips slightly in interest, then accepted decisively, "Very well." Brilliant blue nano energy began to cover his entire body. Jin wore an arrogant smile and declared, "Let me show this world what magic truly is." 1 week later at Han's Academy, the atmosphere on the entrance examination day was extremely lively. Amid the crowded stream of examinees busily completing enrollment procedures, Akama was also highly focused, sitting properly at the exam desk and devoting her entire mind to the written test. Meanwhile, in the academy's splendid corridor, a plump beastman official was leading the way for August and Jin. He spoke respectfully, "It is truly an honor to have you personally escorting him here. I assume Unit 7 of the Holy Knights must be very busy." August calmly replied, "Please do not concern yourself. It is simply our turn to carry out the mission." Noticing Jin's puzzled expression, August quietly explained that every year, the Holy Knights would take turns selecting 1 member to serve as a special instructor for the academy. This year, that responsibility had been assigned to Unit 7. Jin understood and nodded lightly. They walked along the red carpet stretching through the deep corridor. Jin could not help wondering whether he was truly suited for this job. The official leading the way stopped before a massive wooden door and invited them in. "Please go this way. The principal and the board of directors are waiting for you inside." The door opened, revealing a solemn office where powerful figures were already seated behind desks. Seated in the presiding position was an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She greeted him. "It has been a long time." August immediately bowed respectfully. "Madam Principal." The principal smiled and brought up the past, praising August for quickly becoming an outstanding knight after graduating as the academy's top student. He thanked him for agreeing to support the academy during this period. August clearly affirmed, "It is my responsibility." The principal thoughtfully admitted that she had heard some rumors that August was not only handling the spirit arts issue, but had also been drawn into disputes between internal factions. She understood that his corps was currently very busy and could not mobilize too much manpower at this time. However, she emphasized in a tone that was both calm and stern. With an icy gaze, she said that this did not mean the knights were permitted to disrespect this prestigious academy. At Jin's appearance, a voice filled with suspicion rang out. "Do not tell me you intend to let this man." It seemed this woman had already sniffed out that something was unusual. August immediately spoke up to reassure them, affirming that Jin's abilities far surpassed every member of his Unit 7. He guaranteed that when it came to combat, old Jin was undoubtedly number 1. The headmistress temporarily accepted August's guarantee, but she was still troubled over how to resolve this conflict. Just then Gita, a council member, slammed the table and shot to his feet, fiercely objecting. He roared that this sacred academy had never allowed an inferior race to teach, then pointed at Jin, saying the appointment was an insult to the entire school. After hearing Gita speak, the headmistress turned and asked Lord Rudman for his opinion. That fat man immediately agreed, saying most students came from noble families, and letting an inferior being teach was no different from throwing the academy into chaos. The headmistress looked at August, then slowly offered a suggestion. She concluded that her own thoughts were basically no different from theirs. August then suggested letting Jin speak for himself. Jin stepped forward and bowed politely before everyone. "Please forgive my late introduction. I come from Kodama village. My name is Jin Shido." Seeing that attitude, the headmistress secretly judged that even after being gravely insulted, he still maintained an astonishing calm. Jin looked straight at the council and said clearly, "I fully understand your concerns. However, I would like to ask one small thing." He questioned them frankly, "Am I unworthy of being an instructor because I belong to an inferior race, or because my ability is insufficient?" Before the council's silence, the headmistress firmly declared, "Naturally, it is the second reason, because as long as one has enough strength, all other factors are irrelevant." She asked Jin whether he could prove his ability. Seeing this, August smiled faintly and suggested, "If that is the case, why do we not test it a little?" The testing location was quickly moved to the Spirit Arts training ground of Han's Academy. Since today coincided with the entrance examination, this area was almost empty of students. Gita smiled sinisterly, mocking that even if Jin lost here, it would be less humiliating, because there were not many people watching. Jin still wore a cold expression, silently preparing for the match that was about to begin. In the middle of the vast arena, the headmistress announced the rules were very simple. Both sides could only fight using spirit arts. She believed that personally witnessing Jin's strength was the best way to judge his qualifications as an instructor. An unusual situation quickly drew nearby students, making them whisper about the friendly match that was about to take place. Watching from afar, Milia thought to herself that this was probably the first time she would see teacher Gita truly make a move. Jin sighed softly in boredom. What a waste of time. It seemed the old ancestor was already getting sleepy. Opposite him, Rudman and Gita looked at him with contempt, as though they wanted to see what an inferior being could possibly do. August watched in silence with a solemn expression, because this was also the first time he had seen Jin fight with his own eyes. In their prejudice, low-ranking races had weak bodies, and even if they possessed divine power, they could only unleash a small portion of it. August silently hoped he had not chosen wrongly. Gita narrowed his eyes and asked, "Are you ready?" The moment Jin replied, the old man revealed a venomous smile and declared that he would strike first. Without the slightest hesitation, Gita immediately launched a gigantic fireball that burned fiercely. Jin quickly shifted aside and dodged, letting the attack explode violently right behind him. The intensity of the match left the surrounding students unable to help exclaiming in amazement. Gita became even more smug when he saw several students watching his performance intently. The old man roared, then fired dazzling golden currents of lightning in succession. Jin kept moving with agility, dodging the bolts of lightning crashing down onto the arena floor. Those attacks sent smoke and dust billowing across the training ground. Seeing Jin only dodge, Gita sneered. "Good at running, are you? Just as expected of an inferior being." The old man even bragged that he had once been the top student, though he had never become a holy knight. Gita gathered all his energy into a gigantic ring of flame, roaring that Jin was not qualified to be his opponent. Jin sighed softly, thinking that honestly he should not use this kind of power, especially not against a human, but at this moment he no longer had any other choice. Jin poured strength into his legs, then suddenly unleashed his power. Brilliant blue energy immediately enveloped his entire body. Looking straight at his opponent, Jin declared with dignity, "I will show you a small part of it." A gigantic sphere of energy formed in his hand. Gita stared blankly into the air, his eyes filled with doubt and unease. Immediately after, a suffocating pressure descended upon the entire arena. Gita was pressed flat against the ground by an invisible force. The stone floor split apart, and the old man could not move at all. Witnessing that terrifying scene, both the headmistress and Rudman were alarmed, almost unable to believe their eyes. Even August was stunned, sweat pouring out before Jin's overwhelming might. Milia watched from afar and cried out in shock and terror, "What is this?" Gita lay miserably on the floor, groaning in despair. What exactly just happened? Jin strolled closer and calmly explained. He had only adjusted the gravity a little, there was no need to make such a fuss. He swept his gaze over everyone present and asked with a sneer whether they had never heard of this kind of spirit art before. Jin gave a cold smile and said clearly that at this academy, he still had many things to teach, not only to the students but to all of them as well. Gita was completely subdued beneath the crushing pressure of gravity. He collapsed to his knees on the arena floor, gasping in terror, while Jin calmly adjusted his gloves. After that, he lightly snapped his fingers to release the flow of energy. The moment the pressure vanished, Gita immediately cried out in panic. "What did you just do to me?" The top student now looked no different from someone scared out of his wits. Jin only answered calmly, "That was clearly spirit art. Do you not know that, sir?" Gita roared in fury, unable to accept the truth before his eyes. "I have never heard of such a strange spirit art. You must have only used some cheap trick." After witnessing that overwhelming display, the crowd began to whisper among themselves. The principal looked thoughtfully at the arena, believing that everything was already over, while August also gave a slight nod. The students watching from afar were all stunned by what had just happened. One of them exclaimed in admiration, "There is no doubt, that was an extremely high-level spirit art." Amid the crowd, Milia looked at Jin with eyes filled with both suspicion and fear. She could hardly believe this could happen. Unlike us, who evolved through the protection of spirits, that inferior race should never possess even the slightest trace of divine power. Milia trembled as she wondered who that mysterious man truly was. Meanwhile, Gita lost control and rushed forward to seize Jin by the collar. Before that fierce expression, Jin remained composed and said, "Calm down a little, kid." 1 week later, Hans Academy was still operating under its harsh regimen. This place did not merely teach knowledge, it also trained warriors capable of destroying Dragonkin. Principal stood on the platform, her voice ringing throughout the Great Hall. However, for those who complete the curriculum, becoming a holy knight will no longer be a distant dream. Anyone who can pass this course is truly worthy of admiration. She emphasized that the final result depended entirely on each student's ability. From the high balcony, the upperclassmen observed the ceremony and remarked that there were quite a few common-born freshmen this year. Milia stood there quietly, holding a paper fan in her hand, her face filled with thought until a voice called from behind. A red-haired male student named Lias approached with a confident smile, seeming surprised to see Milia attending the entrance ceremony. Lias sneered that he had thought she never cared about anyone else. Milia replied coldly, "You only came here to curry favor with the nobles among the new recruits." Suddenly Lias's gaze froze when he looked down at the seats below. He asked in alarm, "What is going on? Why is someone from an inferior race brazenly sitting in the seats reserved for instructors?" The answer rang out briefly, simple, "Because he is a professor." Lias shouted in astonishment, "What?" He turned to ask Milia what she thought of that man, yet still could not hide his contempt. In any case, that man is only someone from a lowly race. At this rate, the ancestor will definitely slap him. Milia lightly closed her fan, a trace of displeasure flashing through her deep blue eyes, yet she still replied softly, "Perhaps you are not wrong." From the instructor seats below, Jin glanced lightly up at the balcony. He could clearly sense the probing gazes gathering on him. Jin looked thoughtfully at the vastness of the academy, telling himself that investigating a place this enormous would surely take no small amount of time. Even so, the discriminatory gazes from the surrounding students still made him extremely uncomfortable. Jin understood that he had to erase the label of inferior as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would stand out too much and easily become the most suspicious person. The academy bell rang out, signaling the official start of class. In the lecture hall, Gita stood on the platform and announced, "Starting today, we will begin learning spirit arts. Do not let the rookies overtake you." He looked down at the classroom, sparsely filled with students, and revealed a meaningful smile. "Perhaps this does not bother you, because you all belong to the elite class, but that is exactly what I wish to remind you of." Gita looked around the empty room and pretended to be surprised. "What is this? Why is the class so empty today? Could it be that you lack enthusiasm?" Julia sat below, closing her eyes slightly in boredom. That was far too obvious. In truth, Gita was thoroughly delighted with his own scheme. Who would want to listen to an inferior person teach a class? I deliberately spread the word everywhere that someone from a lowly race would be teaching today. This trick is ancient, Gita. Standing behind him, Jin silently felt trouble closing in around him. He turned around, put on a fake smile, and urged him on. "Very well, let us begin. Sir Jin, please introduce yourself." Jin calmly stepped onto the lectern and spoke. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Jin, and I have been assigned here to guide you through the foundational knowledge of spirit arts. It is a pleasure to meet you all." Immediately Lias, the student with blazing red hair and a powerful bearing, shot to his feet. That man asked challengingly, "Do you truly think you are qualified to do this?" The moment he opened his mouth, he ran straight into an expert. Jin did not waver at all. He looked straight at the other party and replied, "I will leave that for you all to judge. If you find my lecture useless, you may skip class." That spirited answer made Lias pause for a moment in interest. Rumble. Jin spoke in a low voice, his gaze becoming sharper and more solemn than ever. "But there is one rule you must remember. Never use this power to harm people." As soon as he finished speaking, brilliant blue nano energy erupted in Jin's hand, spreading pressure throughout the lecture hall. Jin began the lecture by explaining the true nature of spirit arts. It was the power to nullify the super regeneration ability of the corrupted. However, that suppressive effect did not act on the human body, and only caused ordinary physical damage. He looked straight at the students and asked, "Do you know why?" "Because this power was created solely to destroy the corrupted. Therefore, I require you all to never abuse it." Tia stood beside him, silently observing with a worried expression. Right after that, a male student with beast ears burst into a contemptuous snicker. "Are you stupid? Power is just power. Starting trouble so early, have you eaten yet, kid?" That man smugly folded his arms behind his head, mocking that he had once been curious about what an inferior person could possibly teach, and yet Jin was telling them not to use spirit arts. That man laughed provocatively. "Perhaps you are afraid of us because you yourself are nothing but a powerless member of an inferior race, right?" Those insulting words made the entire lecture hall ring with mocking laughter from the students. Jin remained calm. He curled his lips slightly and issued a challenge. "If you think I do not. If you believe I have no strength, then try proving it." Before the other party's astonishment, he demanded that the male student use his strongest move to attack him. Jin declared clearly, "If you can make me suffer even the slightest scratch, I will leave this place and never return." That spirited declaration made the gray-haired student curl his lips in triumph, ready to move and eliminate the one he despised. He poured in all his divine power, creating a brilliant golden current heavy with pressure, then roared, "Do not wait until you regret it to cry and beg, low-born trash." He warned Jin not to wait until it was too late to back down. The attack was so fierce that Gita behind him also cried out in panic, "You idiot, stop right now. Are you trying to drag me into this too? Teacher will send all of you flying." But ignoring every attempt to stop him, the student shouted, "Take this move." Then he fired the massive lightning bolt straight down below. An earth-shattering explosion erupted at once, swallowing him whole. The Beastman student burst into delighted laughter after that attack. Yet that smile quickly vanished when a surge of energy tore through the smoke. An energy arrow skimmed past his face and plunged straight into the wall behind him, leaving cracks that sent chills down the spine. Amid the smoke and dust, Jin strode out with imposing confidence, completely unharmed. He warned coldly, "If I wanted to kill you, I would have done it long ago." Jin stood firm on the lectern, hexagonal nano-shields glowing around his hand as proof of his overwhelming power. He declared in a low voice, "Judging others by appearance is a fatal mistake." Witnessing that scene, Leas was so stunned that sweat broke out on his skin, wondering what that power just now was and whether it was truly spirit art. Jin looked straight at the students who had fallen deathly silent, then continued speaking. "You thought I was weak just because I belong to an inferior race, correct? But the truth is that I am far stronger than you." He curled his lips and asked the wretched student what he should call him, then said decisively that he would give the answer himself. Jin stood tall, his sharp gaze sweeping across the lecture hall along with an arrogant smile. He loudly announced his new title, Professor. This new title really does sound captivating. Jin stood on the lectern, looked over the entire class, then asked a highly specialized question. "Among you, who truly understands the necessary condition for activating spirit art?" The student who had attacked him earlier replied awkwardly, "Is that not something that only requires relying on one's own imagination?" He added that mages raise their divine power, transmit the image in their mind to the spirits to give it form, and regarded that as basic knowledge. Jin smiled faintly, admitting that imagination was very important, but immediately stated that it was absolutely not the prerequisite for activation. He explained that spirits in fact only released their power when they received a certain wavelength frequency. Hearing the concept of wavelength frequency, the student could not hide his bewilderment. Wavelengths, Jin continued calmly, there are 8 different types of wavelengths in total. He demonstrated powers one after another, such as incineration and protection. Then he continued with electricity, healing, and freezing, while emphasizing that these were all pieces of knowledge the students should have clearly mastered long ago. Besides the types just mentioned, Jin also introduced more advanced abilities such as gravity manipulation, light control, and air pressure control. He raised his hand and created a polyhedron. The shape glowed brilliantly, then he revealed that it belonged to the 5th type. "The ability I used just now was spatial protection." Seeing that scene, Teacher Gita widened his eyes in panic and astonishment. "8 types, are you a monster?" Jin calmly replied that in order to apply these foundational principles, visualization was indispensable, just like the way that student had once fired an electric spear at him. Jin wore a confident smile, adjusted his posture, then declared in a ringing voice, "Now then, may we begin the official lecture? This class is about to explode." Jin walked along the academy's pristine white corridor, his mind still constantly thinking about the secret investigation mission. In that vast space, wherever he went, he saw students bustling back and forth, making it very difficult to trace anything suspicious. Jin thought to himself, "I need to investigate this enormous academy, but everywhere is crowded with students coming and going. I still have not discovered any place that is truly suspicious." He wondered whether he should target the restricted areas ordinary students were not allowed to approach. His appearance quickly drew many gazes, along with murmurs calling him professor. The students' discussions rang out, while Milia quietly followed behind with a probing look in her eyes. Milia suddenly called out to stop him. "Hey, you over there. Just where are you from?" She folded her arms, looked straight at Jin, and admitted, "So you are not merely someone from a lowly race. You are definitely not ordinary, I have to acknowledge that." Milia was full of suspicion because someone regarded as inferior should not have been able to use every kind of spirit art. Jin still replied calmly, "I already explained it in class. As long as one can separate the wavelengths, anyone can do it." Hearing that, Milia snapped irritably, "Do not talk about it as if it were easy. If it were truly that simple, you would not have drawn this much attention." She realized the crowd around them was whispering curiously, discussing whether every kind of spirit art was truly within his reach. She immediately proposed decisively, "Let us find somewhere else to talk." The 2 of them left the crowded area together, searching for a more private place. Stopping at a deserted corner of the corridor, Milia narrowed her eyes and asked, "What about now? Are you willing to answer my question?" Jin did not avoid it, and calmly revealed the truth. "It is simple. For the past 100 million years, I was an ancient person sleeping in Kodama village." He was telling the truth, yet no one believed him. Milia froze, then mocked him. "You really do know how to joke." She demanded that he be more serious and asked again, "Then let me ask once more. What did you do 100 million years ago?" Jin's gaze suddenly became cold and profound. He replied in a low voice, "Back then, I was a secret agent. It is a long story." Milia asked in surprise, "What does secret agent mean?" Jin answered calmly. He explained that it was someone who worked in service of the nation. He sank into thought as he recalled the past, when he had once faced countless villains. Though everything had happened 100 million years ago, those memories remained vivid, as if they had occurred only yesterday. The image of Jin in modern tactical gear, holding a gun while hiding behind ruined walls amid a hail of bullets, surfaced vividly. Those fierce battles amid smoke, fire bullets, and bombs made Jin murmur without thinking, "Ah, it really does bring back memories." Milia curiously asked why someone like him had ended up sinking into such an endlessly long sleep. Jin admitted that it was because I failed. He had once been arrogant enough to think that as long as he worked hard, he could manage everything. But the price he had to pay was the feeling of powerlessness when he lost everything amid the ruins and the sweeping onslaught of terrifying mutated monsters. Jin looked at Milia and said, I agreed to become an instructor because I hoped that when I faced trouble, you would help me. Milia remained silent, still doubting whether what he had told her was true. When Jin asked where they were going, she only replied that she wanted to fulfill her duty as a guide. She led him to stop before an old worn room, then calmly said they had arrived. Looking at the dust-covered room, Jin wondered what this place was. Milia explained that it was where instructors stored materials for their classes. Jin could not hide his disappointment, wondering how a shabby old storeroom like this could even be called a library. He quietly observed the old bookshelves and the strange items displayed all around. A moment later, he suddenly turned back and asked Milia the real reason she had brought him here. Milia held several folders in her hands and replied that she was also investigating this matter. Milia showed Jin the map and pointed out an unusual empty space beside the room. It was wide enough to form another room, so she asked whether it seemed suspicious. Jin nodded, saying that if there was a secret, it was certainly right here. He stepped closer to the bookshelf, then firmly pulled an object as if activating a hidden mechanism. Immediately after that, a pitch-black secret passage leading downward was suddenly revealed behind the shelf. Jin murmured, so that was it. It seemed that her judgment had not been wrong at all. Milia asked in shock how he had noticed it. Jin explained that although the entire area was covered in a thick layer of dust, this spot alone was unusually clean. He admitted that the rest came from intuition accumulated through his own experience. Jin told Milia to wait outside while he went in to check first, but she immediately objected, saying that she wanted to go with him as well. Jin warned in a stern voice that the place was extremely dangerous. If something was inside, it was very likely one of the corrupted. Milia replied firmly that he should not underestimate her. She said confidently that her grades were among the top of her year, and her skills even surpassed her brother's. Faced with that determination, Jin had no choice but to give in. He said he would trust her abilities, then gave an unreadable smile and walked down. Jin used a light manipulation technique, creating a radiant sphere to illuminate the way through the dark, damp, cold stone steps. Jin remarked that this passage led quite deep underground. He inwardly marveled that light manipulation really was convenient. Looking at the bottomless darkness ahead, Jin lightly joked that if this were a fantasy story, a monster would probably appear soon. Milia paused slightly, surprised as she asked whether he had just said fantasy. She quickly returned to the main issue and asked whether, since he had fought evildoers for so long, he had found any clues yet. Jin only smiled and said she was asking too many questions for one workday. Milia then teased that the ancient ancestor was dodging the interview. Jin thoughtfully raised a hand to his chin, as if waiting something. Then he slowly said, well, he guessed that Lord Rudman was very likely involved in this matter as well. Milia asked in surprise how he knew. Jane explained that although Rudman appeared calm while talking whenever he was not speaking to anyone, that man's mind seemed to be somewhere else. According to Jin's experience, that was usually the sign of someone being forced to do something against their original purpose. He realized that Rudman's vigilance was unusually strong, but still pretended not to know so he could continue investigating. Hearing this, Milia said in confusion that she had thought Teacher Zeta was the suspicious one earlier, but with an instructor like him, that was unlikely. Milia was still far too naive, while Gita was exceptionally good at acting. She believed that his emotions were always clear on his face, so he must surely be a kind person with no schemes. Jin merely smiled at that innocence, then urged her to keep going. The two of them advanced deeper below. Milia could no longer hide her astonishment at the scale of this place. It was hard to believe that such a vast space existed beneath the academy. Suddenly, Jin stopped short, his stunned gaze fixed ahead. Milia asked anxiously what had happened, while Jin broke into a sweat and muttered that he never expected that thing to be here. In the gloomy space, a gigantic metal gate appeared, sturdy and sealed tight with locking wheels. Jin was stunned as he recognized it as the entrance to a secret laboratory that Kagura had left all across the world. Jin stood silently before the massive gate, inwardly confirming that this was Kagura's laboratory. He noticed that it was strictly protected by advanced nanomachines. Faced with that scale, Milia exclaimed in shock that a gigantic gate was actually beneath the academy. She wondered in confusion what secret this place was hiding, then asked worriedly whether they could get inside. Jin answered that they could not, because fundamentally they needed an access key to enter. Milia wondered about that key, and Jin began to explain. Simply put, it was the necessary medium to open this door. He thoughtfully recalled what had happened in Kodama village, where Kama was the one who had inherited that key. Jin speculated that there was very likely someone in this place who had once received a similar inheritance. If that was the case, he extended his hand and activated a radiant stream of nano energy in his palm. When Jin placed his hand on the metal, the system immediately announced that highest level access authorization was being verified. The unlocking process began, and the gigantic gate gradually showed signs of movement. The door slowly opened before Milia's utter astonishment. Jin inwardly thought that the one who wanted to sow chaos in this nation was the person holding the access key to this place. Behind the door was a terrifying gigantic creature with countless pairs of glowing eyes, imprisoned behind iron bars. Jin called it the ultimate weapon. Milia trembled with fear, almost unable to believe what was appearing before her eyes. She asked in panic why this gigantic thing was right beneath the academy. This tour was truly far too intense. She suddenly remembered and asked why Jin had been able to open the door despite having no key. Jin walked forward leisurely and replied briefly that ancient people were naturally very special. Milia watched Jin's back, growing even more suspicious of this man's true identity. She wondered whether he really was someone from 100 million years ago. Meanwhile, Jin approached the iron cages, his gaze full of thought as he observed the creatures inside. He inwardly found it strange that they obediently allowed themselves to be imprisoned like this. Jin realized that even the other corrupted showed similar behavior. They were completely silent, showing no intention of attacking at all. That reminded him of the monster that had once been in the bandit's hands, which had also remained just as silent when it was inside the cage. What bothered Jin the most was a gigantic corrupted being locked behind the iron bars. He wondered how they had managed to bring this monster down here. Milia half closed her fan, affirming that her brother's suspicions about the shady dealings within the academy were completely correct. He proposed setting up an ambush right here to force the mastermind to reveal himself. However, Jin immediately opposed it. He said that before doing that, they needed to seal off the academy and deal with all these corrupted beings. Hearing this, Milia froze and asked whether he intended to leave that criminal with a chance to escape. Jin answered in a low voice that he understood how she felt, but what if these corrupted monsters suddenly lost control? He stressed that if an incident occurred, the first ones in danger would be the students right above them. Jin believed August would certainly put everyone's safety before capturing the enemy as well. She fell silent in thought, then finally had to admit that Jin's words were entirely reasonable. Jin's gaze suddenly turned icy, and he inwardly thought he had a bad feeling. At times like this, his instincts were often frighteningly accurate. Jin decided to stay behind and inspect the laboratory a little more carefully. He gave Milia an important task: contact August and immediately lock down the academy. After receiving her agreement, he immediately turned around. He strode toward the corridor. Alright. Jin continued walking along the long hallway. His mind kept returning to the secrets still hidden away. Given the current situation, Jin quietly hoped he would soon find a clue to unravel the knot of the incident. Meanwhile, whispers and discussions began spreading through every corner of the academy. People rumored that the new professor had given him a lesson he would never forget. Oh, how truly pathetic. Hearing the students mock him, Gita trembled with rage, his face twisted in resentment. The old man ground his teeth and growled that because of that inferior species, his honor had been utterly ruined. Gita could not accept the truth, his mouth constantly muttering how that man could possibly control all 8 types of spirit magic. That man must have used some kind of trickery. The old man stamped his feet and roared madly in the corridor, swearing he would expose that man's true face with his own hands. Just then, the headmistress suddenly appeared behind him, reminded him, "Lord Gita, the students are frightened, so could you please stop those strange actions?" Caught in such a miserable state, Gita cried out in panic, Headmistress." The headmistress smiled faintly with a meaningful look. I have no intention of judging your personal tastes." Gita could only stew in grievance when he realized she regarded his actions as a form of amusement. She suddenly asked, "By the way, have you seen Lord Ruslan anywhere?" Gita thought for a moment, then replied that ever since today's entrance ceremony began, he had not seen him again. The answer made the headmistress look weary. She raised a hand to her forehead and sighed, saying it was troublesome, because she needed to ask him about classes for the new students. But then she suddenly stopped, her eyes widening in shock when she saw something unusual ahead. Outside, the headmistress stared up at the sky in a daze, where a gloomy purple cloud was covering the academy's towers. She could not help shuddering as she wondered what that thing was. Could the academy be about to face a great disaster? At the same time, Milia ran with all her strength through the dark corridors, her breathing hurried and filled with panic. After passing through the wooden door, Milia clutched her chest and panted heavily. Only one thought remained in her mind: she had to report this to her brother as quickly as possible. But from within the darkness, a deep, hoarse voice suddenly rang out, "Planning to tattle, little intelligence lady." Milia's face went pale, her eyes widening because she was horrified to realize that the one blocking her path was Lord Ruslan. The fat man wore a sinister smile, making Milia cry out in panic, "Lord Ruslan." Meanwhile, deep underground, Jin pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped into a room flooded with red light. The blazing red light made him freeze and blurt out, "What the hell is this?" Before his eyes stood a colossal machine surrounding a blazing red sphere, radiating a fierce source of energy. The sphere kept trembling and thudding, just like the heart of a living creature. Jin pondered inwardly, could Kagura have created this thing? Without hesitating for too long, Jin quickly approached the control console and began operating the system. Immediately after, a hidden storage compartment popped open, revealing a communication cube and a nanoparticle injector. He recognized these as the communication device and nanoparticle injector Kagura had left behind. Holding the cube in his hand, Jin silently hoped Kagura had stored a clue to explain the strange events taking place. The device activated at once. Kagura's image appeared and said, "Can you hear me, Jin? It seems you finally found your way here." He stated that he had expected Jin would manage it, because this place was located closest to the laboratory where Jin had once awakened. Kagura continued revealing that in this very room, they had once created an extraordinarily astonishing device. Part of its function was now carefully sealed within the nanoparticles. With a deeply smug expression, Kagura declared, "I really am a genius." Then he posed a mysterious question, "Try guessing what kind of device this is." The answer left Jin completely stunned, because it was a tool used to perform teleportation. Jin repeated in shock and disbelief, "Teleportation, are you kidding?" He looked toward the giant monster being imprisoned, then looked again at the blazing red sphere radiating intense energy before his eyes. He could only say that it was unbelievable. The red sphere still continued beating rhythm by rhythm like a colossal heart in the dark room. Deep underground, the giant monster with countless glowing eyes remained imprisoned in the silent darkness. The ticking of the astronomical clock rang out steadily, beat after beat. That sound seemed to mark each 10 seconds slowly passing by. Jin stood silently before the great machine, at its center the blazing red sphere beating incessantly like a mechanical heart. Jin thought in shock, was this the machine used to teleport space? He could not help being stunned by such unbelievable technology. Looking at the illustration of matter being transported through spatial gates, Jin began connecting everything logically. If that was true, then what August had once said about the corrupted suddenly appearing in the capital finally had an explanation. He wondered in doubt, had they been sent there through this teleportation device? Jin's gaze turned icy when he realized that the corrupted monsters in the Great Hall and this machine were closely connected. That was also the spatial teleportation device. When he looked at the glowing blue energy of the sample teleportation gate, Jin suddenly froze in astonishment. It looked far too different. There was definitely something wrong with this gate. He turned back to look at the blazing red sphere flaring fiercely behind him, his heart troubled. What exactly is this thing? At that moment, a dry clack rang out from the astronomical clock, signaling that an important mechanism had just been activated. The blazing red sphere suddenly fired a dazzling beam of light, carrying a violent shockwave that shook the entire room. Jin panicked and raised his hand to shield his eyes from the terrifying pressure crashing toward him. At that very moment inside the iron cages, the enormous monster's body began to glow, then shattered into countless tiny particles. The ghastly entities were swept away one after another by the massive spatial energy, then vanished into the crimson light before Jin's stunned eyes. Just outside the academy, the female knight Rhea rushed over in a panic and called out loudly, "August, there is an emergency, something has happened in the royal capital." August stood motionless with a grave expression, replying in a low voice that he understood the situation. He gritted his teeth in worry, knowing this was truly serious. In the distance, the capital sky was stained red by the pillars of teleportation light. Corrupted monsters fell everywhere, making August bitterly say this was the worst possible situation. At the same time, in the academy's empty corridor, Melia was standing in a daze when Lord Rudman suddenly stepped out from the darkness with a mysterious smile. The old man spoke in a falsely gentle voice. "Melia, what is happening? Why does your face look so serious?" Melia froze and turned her head. Rudman narrowed his eyes at her and softly said, "My lady." Without the slightest hesitation, Melia unleashed blue divine power and ordered firmly, "Move aside at once." She pointed straight at that fat man's face and coldly questioned whether the old man was also involved in this matter. Rudman burst into delighted laughter, then calmly admitted, "So you realized it long ago. It seems you have been secretly investigating this matter all this time." Rudman's face suddenly turned cold, and he said through clenched teeth that Melia was one step too late. When she asked what the old man meant, he stood in her way and declared arrogantly. The old man explained that the plan had originally been meant to happen later, because someone kept probing around. They had to speed things up. Rudman believed Jin was a major threat, every bit as troublesome as her elder brother. And what about her at that moment? Jin was running with all his strength along the pipeline system. He followed the flow of energy. trying to find a way to stop the disaster from spreading. Rudman glanced toward the entrance of the secret basement and coldly concluded, in truth, he has already found that secret path right now. He had barely finished boasting before trouble arrived. Rudman stared sharply at Milia, smugly saying Jin was right beneath them, then declared that every seed of danger had to be uprooted to prevent future consequences. Faced with that threat, Milia remained steadfast and coldly asked whether the old man truly thought he had the strength to defeat her. Rudman curled his lips in a sinister smile, insisting that he could because he now held an unstoppable source of power in his hands. While the old man was still busy showing off, Hakama had silently appeared behind him, gathering her strength to lift a large ceramic vase high above his head. Milia's eyes widened in shock at this completely unexpected appearance. Rudman still had no idea and continued bragging about the new energy. Before he could finish speaking, Hakama decisively smashed the vase down onto his head, making the old man collapse on the spot. Milia faintly curled her lips, not knowing whether to laugh or cry at that ironic situation. Hakama raised a hand to wipe her sweat, sighing in relief because it was finally handled. Hakama stood proudly beside the unconscious Rudman and declared loudly, "It is over, I win this time." Milia still had not recovered from her astonishment, and asked why the little girl was in this secret place. Hakama honestly said she had gone looking for Jin, because outside was in chaos and everyone needed him badly. The little girl pointed toward the friend who had come with her, saying that Kudo had seen Jin enter this area, so the two of them secretly followed him. Milia looked at the newly arrived girl and asked whether she was a first-year student. The girl with rabbit ears politely confirmed that her name was Kudo Plaza. Kudo asked Hakama worriedly if it was really fine to have hit even an instructor. Hakama calmly said that man had not seen their faces, so just blame Milia. Milia shouted angrily, "Stop calling me my lady." Meanwhile, Jin was still hurrying. He rushed through rows of corridors, heading straight for the center of the riot. Hakama ran over in a panic and called out loudly, "Lord Jin." When Jin stepped out from the secret passage and saw Rudman lying motionless on the floor, Hakama asked anxiously what exactly had happened. Before he could answer, the little girl gripped Jin's hand tightly and urged him in panic that things outside were very bad. This was an emergency, they had to run at once. Jin replied in a low voice that he knew. His eyes turned cold as he understood the horrifying truth. The corrupted ones in the laboratory had all escaped. Milia was stunned as she realized the seriousness of the matter, because that meant the group immediately used all their strength to race through the academy's magnificent corridors and rush outside. Looking down from above, a horrifying scene appeared before their eyes. The entire capital was drowning in a sea of flames, and explosions tore apart its peace one after another. The corrupted ones madly attacked innocent civilians, and cries for help echoed through the streets. Wolf-like monsters bared their fangs and lunged at passers-by. In the sky, enormous monster birds also kept diving down, sweeping away innocent commoners. The destruction still had not stopped. Each heavy step of the mutated monsters crushed the structures below. A gigantic entity with glowing muscles strode into the city center, spreading terror to everyone who witnessed it. The monster bearing countless blazing eyes from the laboratory had now escaped outside. It roared in a frenzy, radiating a crimson killing aura as if it wanted to devour the entire kingdom of Kamosia. Looking at the ruined scene, Milia trembled, her hands shaking violently with fear as she realized the capital was in danger. Jin gritted his teeth in regret, blaming himself for misjudging the situation. He should have destroyed that machine from the very beginning. Suddenly, Hakama pointed ahead and shouted loudly, "Jin, look up there." Her allies had spotted it just in time. At the center of the capital, a massive pillar of light erupted, revealing the silhouette of the supreme entity amid the blazing ruins. The enormous monster roared thunderously, the energy in its mouth gathering and aiming straight toward the royal castle. Milia and Hakama could not help being horrified. Both of them realized in terror that if the situation continued, the royal family members would certainly fall into danger. Faced with the tragedy caused by his own complacency, Jin decisively took out the nano-substance syringe and told himself, "My fault, I will handle it." The instant the nanomaterial seeped into his blood, blue electricity flared up and covered Jin's body. This was the fruit of the upgrade, shortening spatial movement through the energy stored within the nanites. Though it could only be used once a day and was limited to his field of vision, this ability still granted him absolute mobility. At the same time, the monster began to open fire, launching a massive beam of destructive light straight toward the castle. Before the stunned gazes of Milia and Hakama, Jin vanished in a dazzling streak of light. A flash of blue glimmered, and he instantly appeared in midair. He blocked the path of the beam, activating his defenses with all his might, forming a layer of hexagonal nanite shields that stopped the terrifying attack in the sky. As the capital sank into chaos, a dark blue corrupted monster with razor-sharp teeth rampaged wildly, making the people scream and flee. A female guild employee rushed down the corridor in panic. She shoved the door open, burst into the office and cried out, "Guildmaster, there is a giant corrupted one outside the city walls." Hadid Ganslot, guildmaster of the Imperial Capital Guild, remained silently gazing at the burning scene outside the window before softly replying that he already knew. Hadid bitterly admitted that at this point, they had almost no other options left. He faced the harsh reality. All their fighting forces had already been deployed outside to protect civilians among the rows of fiercely burning buildings. Even the elite Holy Knight Order, including August, was pouring all its strength into holding back this attack. When the female employee asked in alarm what he meant, Hadid revealed the dreadful truth. Half of the Holy Knights had left the Imperial capital on distant missions. The news left the girl frozen in horror. A giant monster with countless blazing eyes began crushing buildings and spreading destruction everywhere. Hadid understood that this could not be a random incident. It was a meticulously calculated attack, timed precisely for when the Holy Knights had just left the Imperial capital. The monster roared, gathered energy, then fired a fierce pillar of destructive light. Hadid thought that if the Grand Commander were here, perhaps they could have stopped this disaster. A giant pillar of light swept across the capital, burning everything in its path to ashes. Hadid closed his eyes in pain, thinking it was all over, until the female employee shouted that a savior had appeared. Hadid stared wide-eyed into the sky, utterly unable to believe the sight before him. Within the destructive light, Jin appeared just in time. He poured all his strength into activating the hexagonal nanite shields, stopping the attack in midair. Hadid and the female assistant stared out the window in shock, then he blurted out, "Who is that man?" The girl beside him cried out excitedly when she recognized the savior from Kodama village. In the distance, the giant monster with glowing golden tumors on its back still loomed as it advanced, continuing to destroy the capital. Jin immediately landed on a rooftop. He poured all his nanite energy into his fist. A dazzling radiance erupted, then Jin fired a maximum energy beam straight at the target. Terrifying power pierced through space, landing a heavy blow that made the giant monster roar in agony. Even so, Jin quickly realized that the situation was not easy to handle. Seeing the monster still standing firm after that strike, he silently judged that its size was far too enormous. He understood that he could not completely bring it down yet. Jin's breathing began to grow ragged. He realized that instantaneous movement had consumed more strength than expected and thought to himself that the situation was truly troublesome. Faced with this challenge, Jin decided to change tactics. Fine, time to move around a little. A radiant blue energy sword appeared in his hand. Jin shot forward like lightning, swinging his sword in a powerful slash that tore open the monster's rough hide. Precise strike made the grotesque creature howl in utter agony. Jin skimmed across the rooftops, clearly understanding that with only one strike like the one before, the monster would not take long to recover. Even so, that much was enough to help him buy a little more precious time. Jin reminded himself to stay completely focused. He decided to bring the most fundamental principles of the nanomachine into the battle. Controlling gravity, Jin neutralized nearly all of his body's weight to move more lightly. He continued manipulating atmospheric pressure, creating extremely powerful gusts of wind. Thanks to that, his speed rose to an astonishing level. In another corner of the capital, a soldier was pinned down by a dark blue monster, able only to grit his teeth helplessly in despair. Suddenly, a giant fireball came crashing down. The blow made the monster roar in pain. Two Beastmen students appeared just in time and declared firmly that they had come to support him. Realizing they were students from Hans Academy, the soldier emotionally thanked the young men for their courage. Looking around the ruins, the students judged that the Imperial capital had now fallen into an extremely critical situation. They understood that they could not delay any longer and had to act immediately. As the monster encirclement closed in, a blue sword slash suddenly tore through space, cutting down the mutated creatures in an instant. Jin streaked past, then closed in on the next target. Watching Jin charge through the battlefield, the two nearby Beaskin students could not help but be astonished. One of them muttered that this was way too unreal, while the other followed Jin's silhouette with his eyes and asked doubtfully whether that was a lower creature. When they received confirmation, both of them fell silent, staring at the man they had once looked down on as he faced the calamity alone. Jin silently calculated that the monster still needed more time to recover, and he had to use this opportunity to close the distance. It immediately fired at him. Jin easily dodged. Jin quickly observed, then judged that the attack was only big in size yet feeble in power. He immediately decided, if that was the case then, with terrifying speed, Jin swung his sword again and again, cutting down the monsters blocking his path. He saved the gravely wounded civilians from the claws of the monsters just in time. Jin told himself he had to end this battle quickly. Before it could launch its next attack, he would end everything right here. He kept rushing forward like the wind, swinging sharp sword strikes to clear away the mutated creatures threatening the villagers. Faster, he had to be even faster. Jin poured all his strength into his legs, his eyes blazing as he closed in on the colossal target ahead. Jin charged straight toward the giant monster, killing intent blazing as if he meant to crush everything. He moved nimbly across the rooftops, repeatedly slashing hard into its rough hide. Every impact cracked the ground, sending dust and smoke billowing everywhere. The lightning slash cleaved straight down from above, leaving the monster utterly stunned by Jin's overwhelming power. August and the female knights stood frozen in place, shocked by the scale of the battle unfolding before their eyes. On the city wall, Hakama and the students also held their breath, watching in extreme anxiety. Wasting not another second, Jin shot forward at a terrifying speed, forming a blur that seemed to tear through space. He unleashed sword strikes one after another, woven from brilliant blue energy. They left deep gashes across the terrifying body of the giant monster. Facing an entity as massive as a mountain, Jin did not falter at all and charged straight ahead. He poured all his remaining nano energy into the decisive blow and thought to himself, this is the end. Jin sprang into the air and roared, time to finish this. He condensed a spear of lightning and hurled it downward. The spear shot straight toward the monster's head. A thunderous impact rang out, and the monster was as good as officially defeated. Colossal blue light erupted, piercing into the sky and swallowing the mutated creature whole. That surge of power radiated a suffocating pressure, surpassing even the sturdy walls of the capital. Watching that violent scene from afar, the beastman and the woman, Knight could only stare in shock and blurt out, wait, what exactly is going on here? Amid the still burning ruins, Jin stood proudly beside the body of the monster that had gone completely still. That sight made anyone who saw it wonder, where did this godlike man come from? 3 days after the disaster, the capital began reconstruction. The collapsed houses were gradually repaired by the people and soldiers working together. Jin stood silently by the window, inwardly judging that although the incident had been enormous, it fortunately had not caused too severe a loss of life. He sat pensively on the bed, telling himself it was all thanks to the excellence of the Holy Knight Order. However, because they had to guard against other giant, corrupted beings, many Holy Knights had not been able to act freely during the battle. Even so, the situation afterward was quickly brought under control. The knights spread out everywhere to help the people and stabilize order. Kansas Academy alone had been strictly sealed off by soldiers to serve a large-scale investigation. Teacher Rudman, believed to be the mastermind behind the entire conspiracy, had officially been chained and arrested. Not only that, the instructors and even the head of the academy, suspected of being involved, were also taken away one after another. They were all currently being harshly interrogated at the Imperial Palace. Jin leaned back, folded his arms behind his head, and sighed. The academy would probably be closed for quite a while, even though he had only taught for 1 day. Yet his gaze suddenly turned icy when he realized that from this incident he had gained another new challenge. Jin pondered his plan. If the enemies gathered in one place, they would still be easy to handle, but when they scattered like this time, he could not eliminate them all. To protect everyone from the corrupted, he understood that he needed to become even stronger. Looking at the nanocube in his hand, Jin grew even more determined toward that goal. Suddenly, a knock rang out at the door, making him turn around in surprise and ask, "Who is ruining my sweet dream?" As soon as he opened the door, Jin immediately froze when he saw Milia standing there. She had been waiting there in a dazzling appearance, with a radiant smile. She said softly, "I came to pick you up." Jin was briefly surprised when Milia blushed and called him teacher. Jin could not help being stunned. Teacher. He thought to himself, the school is already closed. Then who is going to pay my salary? Milia hurriedly explained that her brother was calling for him, wanting to thank him for what had happened, and perhaps there was something else he needed to say. When Jin asked whether she needed to come in person to call him, Milia insisted that of course she did. For someone as important as him, merely sending a servant would be far too rude, so she had come in person as the representative of her family. Jin could only fall silent with a weary look. Curious, he asked, "Are you not going to call me an inferior creature anymore? Does Teacher Jin enjoy being scolded or something?" Milia blushed and answered seriously that she had thought it through carefully, and understood that she should not judge others by their appearance. No matter who the other person was, one had to always maintain the proper respect. She also earnestly hoped to stay by his side to receive more guidance and be taught by him. Just then, Hakama suddenly appeared at the door and inwardly sighed that this young lady changed faces remarkably fast. Seeing Hakama, Jin cheerfully called her name. Hakama said calmly that the dormitory was too boring, so she came over to play. Milia glanced at Hakama, who was bouncing around with irritation. This country girl. Milia was jealous, and the atmosphere grew extremely tense. She inwardly mocked that a country girl dared barge in without permission, truly shameless. Then she pressed. Had Hakama not already learned her lesson? The group headed together toward August's magnificent and splendid mansion. As soon as they stepped through the door, a long line of butlers and maids bowed respectfully in unison, welcoming the young lady home. Jin gently asked the two sisters, "Could you two please guide us?" Pogaru and Nino answered brightly yes. Watching the two sisters swiftly lead the way, Jin thought to himself that they had grown used to working here. Pogaru smiled and said it was all thanks to everyone's help. When Jin asked about the recent riot, both of them said they were still fine. Bawaru said that everyone at their workplace had protected them with extremely powerful combat skills and spirit arts. Jin felt inwardly relieved to see that the two sisters were being looked after very carefully. At the same time, Lady Milia also spoke up, praising the wonderful things Jin had done. Jin asked with slight suspicion. Who did you hear that from? Milia calmly replied that she had heard it from herself on August's day. She declared firmly that recounting her teacher's achievements was the duty of a disciple. Jin stared blankly, wondering when he had taken on a disciple, while Milia told Poguru and Nino to actively learn from Jin, because they were of the same race as him. While Milia was not paying attention, Nino leaned close to Jin's ear and revealed that her mistress had once been very strict with them, but had become much gentler recently. Jin silently thought that this change in attitude was truly an unbelievable turnabout. The group stopped before a large, luxurious pair of doors leading into the main reception room. Poguru gently knocked on the door, then reported, "Sir, we have brought Jin here." From inside, an authoritative voice rang out, "Come in." The door slowly opened, revealing August waiting beside another man. It was a middle-aged man of the wolf race, with silver hair and a sharp, cold gaze, standing there with his arms folded. Jin stepped into the room, while Poguru and Nino bowed respectfully, then quickly withdrew outside. August spoke up to break the silence. "Thank you for coming. Come here and sit. First, I will introduce this person. This is the guild master of the Adventurers Guild in the Imperial Capital, Lord Hadid Gunslot." Hadid took the initiative to rise, politely shook Jin's hand, and said, "I am Hadid. It is an honor to meet you. I hope we can work well together from now on." He recalled the recent incident in a deep voice, saying that he himself had also witnessed what Jin displayed that day with his own eyes. To be honest, if you had not stopped it in time back then, this country would certainly have fallen into a grave crisis. Hadid suddenly bowed his head with deep respect. "First of all, I want to thank you for saving this country." Jin casually waved a hand. "I only dealt with the biggest one. The cleanup of the battlefield afterward was the work of the Holy Knights. Thank them if you want to give thanks." August smiled at that humility, while Hadid quietly observed him and remarked that Jin was rather modest, and even seemed to have no ambition at all. Hadid suddenly revealed a shocking piece of news after this incident. The royal family wished to meet Jin. Those words left Jin unable to keep from freezing. The royal family, but the atmosphere in the room suddenly became suffocatingly tense. Hadid looked straight at Jin with a sharp, cold gaze, saying that before that they needed to clarify one matter. He stated that with the guild's network, almost no information in this country could escape him. Hadid continued pressing him. "Forgive me, but I investigated. Strangely enough, I could not find any information about you." August also spoke sternly, saying that this was precisely what he wanted to clarify. August asked Jin not to evade anymore and to tell the truth, where he came from and what his true purpose was in appearing in this country. Facing pressure from two of the most powerful figures in the capital, Jin's gaze gradually turned cold. August gave a final warning in a low voice, while Hadid demanded that Jin clearly state his true purpose for coming to the kingdom and reveal the whole truth. Jin remained perfectly calm. He leisurely adjusted his glove, then replied calmly that he had never had any intention of hiding anything. Jin added that he had stayed silent only because he thought that even if he said it, no one would believe it. Before that tense atmosphere, Milia and Hakama could only watch Jin's every movement with worry. Faced with his sincere attitude, August stated that if Jin said it with his own mouth, he would believe him. Hearing that, Jin gave a faint smile filled with hidden meaning, then replied, "Then I will trust your words." His face immediately became solemn as he began to reveal his true identity. "I am someone who has lived since 100 million years ago." Jin's shocking declaration made the entire room seem to freeze into silence. August pensively recalled the legend about the taboo of Kodama village, then realized in astonishment that Jin was the person sleeping beyond the door that had never been opened. Though he still had doubts, Hadid had to admit that this was hard to believe, but he chose to believe it. Milia looked at Jin with admiration and confirmed that he had once gone down into the academy basement to open the ancient gate that had been sealed for so long. Milia lightly covered her mouth behind her fan, adding that besides that matter, her elder brother and many others had also witnessed Jin's extraordinary power with their own eyes. His younger sisters certainly left August unable to keep from being stunned. August was still shaken by Jin's confession and blurted out, asking what exactly had happened. Jin calmly explained that all this time, he had been sleeping deep beneath the land of this very country. He said the only reason he had come to the imperial capital was to gather information about the present era. Hadid listened quietly, then asked Jin what kind of information he wanted to learn. Jin raised one finger and answered decisively, "There are two kinds. First is information about the corrupted ones." Jin revealed the shocking truth that they had existed since 100 million years ago, leaving both August and Hadid astonished. With a sharp, cold gaze, he asserted that under normal circumstances, they could not possibly have survived to this era. When Hadid wondered why they still continue to exist, Jin explained that the reason lay in the power of spirits. He said that the spirits from the ancient era had once existed everywhere in this world, through colossal systems of machinery. From the spirit towers, brilliant streams of blue energy shot straight into the sky. then spread into a source of power that covered the entire globe. Jin explained that the corrupted could originally only survive in areas of severe contamination. However, spirits had the ability to purify the environment, using powerful rains of energy to erase contamination and destroy mutated creatures. Hadid immediately raised the crucial question, then why do the corrupted still exist in this era? Jin silently admitted that he himself still did not grasp all the details. He reached in his coat pocket, took out the cube, then activated the virtual screen containing Kagura's data. Jin warned in a stern voice that his friend had said those things were evolving. Seeing technology beyond the era appear before him, Hadid exclaimed in astonishment at how sophisticated it was. Hadid stared at the complex virtual screen, completely unable to understand its operating principles. In their hearts, he and August were still not free of doubt about Jin's origin from 100 million years ago. Jin calmly said that was the reason he had come to the imperial capital. He wanted to know through ancient records how people of the present dealt with the corrupted. When Hadid asked about the second objective, Jin answered decisively that he wanted to find clues about the secret laboratories, including the one beneath the capital, created by Kagura herself. Jin was searching for laboratories scattered across the world, but decided to keep the matter of strengthening his own power secret. With eyes blazing with determination, Jin clearly declared his only goal at that moment. The reason he was here was to wipe every last corrupted one from the world. The entire room fell silent as everyone listened and felt the weight Jin was carrying on his shoulders. Hadid broke the heavy atmosphere, remarking that it was truly an utterly insane story, and August nodded in agreement as well. Even so, August still smiled with trust, affirming that he would place his faith in Jin, because they shared the same goal of destroying the monsters. He also reminded Jin not to tell anyone about this under any circumstances, unless he wanted others to think he had lost his mind. Jin smiled faintly and replied that he understood. When August turned to ask Hadid, the guildmaster admitted that if the captain believed him, he would choose to believe as well. He further explained that someone who wished to harm the kingdom would not risk his life protecting the castle as Jin had done. Just as the discussion was still continuing, a sudden knock sounded at the door, cutting through the atmosphere in the room. Bowaru and Nino entered, politely bowing their heads and apologizing for interrupting everyone's conversation. Bowaru gently opened the door and stepped inside, respectfully announcing that the scheduled time for the audience was drawing near. August rose to his feet, then turned to ask Jin and the others whether they were ready. Before long, a luxurious carriage began to roll forward. The carriage carried the entire group straight toward the magnificent and splendid castle of the Kingdom of Kermosia. Jin stood before the mirror, silently looking at himself in an exceptionally elegant noble formal outfit. He thought to himself that he was about to meet the royal family of this country, yet he still could not understand why he had to dress so elaborately. August and Hadid both nodded, affirming that the formal outfit truly suited him well. Even Milia and the girls praised him in unison, leaving Jin with no choice but to sigh and say that it was only a little hard to move in. Hadid reminded them in a stern voice that the person they were about to meet was the first prince, who was governing the country as regent in place of his father. Therefore, everyone needed to observe proper etiquette. Hadid continued giving instructions as the carriage passed through the city gate. Jin inwardly felt weary, only hoping that he would not get dragged into any more trouble. Inside the palace, rows of fully armed guards stood solemnly along the passageway. That scene created an atmosphere that was both solemn and oppressive. When they entered the dazzling grand hall, August and Hadid immediately knelt and paid their respects with reverence. From above, a dignified voice rang out, "The one who saved the country from crisis, raise your head." Jin slowly lifted his eyes and recognized the person standing before him. It was none other than the first Prince Teos Kermosia, a man with long blonde hair, pointed ears, and an arrogant bearing. Jin introduced himself clearly. "It is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Jin." Prince Teos curled his lips into a faint smile, saying that on behalf of his ailing father, he thanked Jin for doing very well. However, Teos spoke with a superior air when mentioning his origins. He had heard from August that Jin came from Kodama village, and seemed surprised that such a capable person had come from such a small place. Those words made Jin pause for a moment, inwardly repeating the words small place in suspicion. Suddenly, Teos's gaze turned cold and calculating. He did not hide his ambition, bluntly ordering that he would make things clear at once. "Submit to me." Teos arrogantly demanded that Jin devote all his strength to serving the country as a holy knight under him. Jin looked up at the prince, his gaze darkening and clearly revealing killing intent before that forceful offer. Faced with such blatant coercion, Jin's gaze remained cold, deep, and utterly unmoved by the prince's authority. Seeing Jin remain silent, Teos curled his lips in provocation. "What is wrong? Did you not hear what I said?" Hadid dropped to his knees in panic, sweat pouring out as he feared a conflict would erupt. He hurriedly tried to stop them, saying that they were the ones who had summoned Jin. You should not say such a thing. However, Jin had already cut him off decisively with a shocking declaration. I have no intention of staying in this country for too long. Teos narrowed his eyes with calculation, slowly asking about what Jin was doing at the academy. Jin calmly replied that it was only temporary work. The prince's gaze instantly turned cold as he pressed him on whether Jin meant to refuse his offer. The moment Jin began to apologize, Teos coldly cut him off with a face full of killing intent, saying that in that case there was no other way. Immediately, the sound of soldiers' footsteps thundered throughout the grand hall. Countless cold, sharp blades were drawn from their sheaths in unison. Teos ordered the soldiers in an icy voice, "Capture him for me." All the guards immediately rushed forward and surrounded him. Hadid was forced hard against the floor in shock, desperately shouting as he asked what the prince intended to do. Teos calmly slandered him, saying that Jin was in fact suspected of treason. He began twisting the truth, using the excuse that the ancient door beneath the academy, which should have been impossible to open, had now become an escape route for the invaders. Teos coldly said that people believed Jin was the one who had opened that door, so suspecting him was only natural. He even fabricated the claim that Jin saving the kingdom had merely been a staged act to win the people's favor. Faced with that blatant slander, Hadid gritted his teeth in fury, thinking that this was utterly ridiculous and absurd to the extreme. Meanwhile, Jin remained mysteriously silent before the sharp spears pointed straight at him. Teos propped up his chin, tempting him in a crafty voice by saying that wasting Jin's power would be far too regrettable. If he was willing to serve him, everything would be overlooked. He curled his lips into a smile, revealing sharp teeth, then threatened that if Jin still stubbornly refused, death would be hard to avoid. August knelt beside him, sweat soaking his forehead with worry. He knew Jin had not been in the city for long and could not possibly be involved in that matter, and inwardly blamed Teos for deliberately ignoring the fact that he himself had asked Jin to investigate the academy. August was stunned to realize that he had fallen into the prince's trap. Looking at the dense protective forces, he realized that the captain of the 3rd squad and the captain of the 4th squad were also present, were blindly loyal men willing to commit any injustice for Teos' benefit. August bitterly understood that these men would show no mercy to anyone who dared stand in their master's way. If Jin refused, they already had a plan prepared to deal with him on the spot. Teos stepped closer, coldly declaring that Jin was the one who had defeated the invading giant, so letting him go free was far too dangerous. He extended his hand, his voice ringing out with oppressive force. Blazing red eyes radiated heavy killing intent as he delivered his final ultimatum. But since I am generous by nature, I will give you one more chance. Swear your loyalty. A host of holy knights closed in at the same time, quickly tightening the encirclement around Jin in the brightly lit grand hall. Jin coldly answered the prince's coercion. Your highness must be dreaming of some— What was that under Teos' stunned gaze? He calmly continued, what value does a spoken oath have in a place like this? Jin bluntly pointed out that the demand was far too unreasonable. Even if he agreed now, the oath would mean nothing if he fled afterward. He looked at the other man with a cold, sharp gaze and said that he simply wanted to hear something pleasing to his ears. Surrounded by sharp spearheads, Jin remained astonishingly calm. He said he had thought it through, then wondered whether Teos merely wanted to satisfy his lust for power or was hiding some other dark scheme. Those words enraged the prince, and the killing intent in his blazing red eyes surged even higher. Immediately, a large knight aimed his spearhead against Jin's neck and roared, "Shut your mouth. Do you know who you are talking to?" Jin immediately seized that knight's spear. He swung it fiercely, throwing the other man off balance. That man crashed heavily to the floor, while the Knight Order instantly fell into chaos and charged at him together. Jin's arrogant attitude left Teos and August with nothing but stunned silence as they stood frozen in place. Ria was about to rush forward and attack, but she suddenly froze in terror. Ria realized in panic that she was completely powerless, unable to understand why she could not activate her spirit arts. Faced with Jin's resistance, Teos roared madly, "Damn it, seize him at once." The cavalry immediately rushed in like moths to a flame, but Jin only curled his lips faintly, unleashing a series of powerful, decisive strikes. A succession of guards were sent flying across the grand hall. A kick as fast as thunder struck straight into the enemy's chest, sending him flying amid a scream of pain. Jin still calmly gripped another soldier's spearhead, his expression filled with arrogance. Seeing his subordinates taken down so easily, Teos shouted angrily for August. He yelled for him to provide support at once, and make Jin pay for daring to defy the royal family. Before the prince's harsh order, Argos only watched in silence, clear hesitation showing in his deep blue eyes. Argos slowly drew his sword from its sheath, then warned in a low voice that Jin should not blame him. And so August joined the fray, making the atmosphere even more tense. Seeing the elite captain enter the battle, Teos burst into delighted laughter. Good. Whether he lives or dies no longer matters. Capture him at once. The cavalry charged forward together under his command, but a brilliant blue light suddenly erupted. The light blasted them all away, leaving the cavalry crying out in terror. Jin's voice echoed through the grand hall with majestic authority. You said it would be very dangerous to let me remain free, and that is indeed true. If I truly wanted to, flattening this entire city would not be difficult at all. The guards looked around the empty grand hall in panic. They cursed, shouting where he had gone and ordering a thorough search. Amid the chaos, Jin clearly stated that the reason he did not destroy this place was because he wanted to stand on the side of the people and protect the lives of the humans of this era. Jin declared in a cold voice that he still had exceptions. Against vicious people who treated human lives lightly, he would absolutely show no mercy. Suddenly, Jin appeared behind Teos like a ghost, making the prince's blood run cold and his face turn pale with fear. He leaned close to that man's ear and let out an icy threat. Then are you human or are you trash? For lowly vermin who stained the lives of others, Jin would end their story right there. He moved close to the prince's ear and asked in a low, challenging voice which type His Highness belonged to. First Prince Teos Kamosia. Direct threat left Teos ashen, cold sweat streaming down his face as he realized death itself was standing right behind him. Below, Knight Washa, who had just been knocked down, roared furiously and asked whether Jin knew what he was doing. Rhea tightened her grip on the sword in her hand, then answered firmly, I know very well. I am merely resisting someone who is forcing me to do unreasonable things. That knight was so shocked he could hardly believe it, stammering as he asked whether she wanted to oppose this entire nation. But Jin coldly laid bare the truth. The ones rebelling were not him, but them. He declared clearly that if the other side was royalty, he would still show a certain degree of respect. Jin affirmed that if the request was reasonable and lawful under the kingdom's laws, he would be willing to help. But his worth was not so cheap that he had to silently obey absurdity. Looking at Washa's furious expression, Jin lowered his voice in warning. If you intend to use force to coerce me, then do not blame me for resisting. He kept his composure, then said that before this, there was something he wanted to ask the other man. Are you someone who always deludes himself that everything will go exactly as he wishes, or are you something else? Jin's eyes shone with oppressive light, frightening Teos until he stood rigid. He ended with a meaningful sentence. I heard the entire story. At that very moment, a loud noise rang out as the doors of the grand hall were pushed open forcefully. Amid the astonishment of the knights gripping their weapons, a figure appeared along with an elegant voice. In the tense atmosphere, that voice suddenly cut through everything. May I join this conversation? Great doors swung wide open, and a beautiful young woman with long, flowing platinum hair stepped in, wearing a magnificent blue dress. That sudden appearance made Knight Guasa tremble in panic, and he stammered, Princess Sarklot. August let out a sigh of relief, his gaze turning toward the second princess with complete trust. He said softly that she had arrived at exactly the right time, and that he would leave the rest to her. Sarklot Komosia smiled meaningfully, looked straight at her older brother, and spoke in a sharp, mocking voice. It seems royal brother is in quite a good mood. Seeing his younger sister appear, Teos instantly turned pale, cold sweat breaking out as his face grew awkward, and he softly called her name, Sarklot. Jin stood watching the prince's wary attitude toward his own younger sister. Sarklot sighed in exasperation at her brother's crude behavior, then reminded him that if he had invited the hero who saved the nation, he should have invited her as well. She firmly declared that she also had the right to be present here on behalf of their royal father. Charles clenched his teeth in resentment, veins bulging clearly on his neck because of his younger sister's sudden intervention. Just then, a knight approached Teos and said coldly that the one standing here was not a hero, but a criminal who had dared to oppose the royal family. Sarklot narrowed her eyes and looked down, asking if that was truly so. Washa knelt on the floor, angrily accusing Jin of injuring him, but she calmly asked in return whether they had not been rude first. Those words made Washa flush with anger, and he roared furiously, What did you just say? Knight Washa pointed at Jin and loudly accused him of trying to assassinate the first prince. Sarklot tilted her head in confusion. Was that person not merely standing behind royal brother? She turned to Jin with a friendly gaze and gently asked, Is that correct, Sir Jin? Jin smiled faintly and calmly confirmed that it was indeed so. He had only stood behind him and asked a question. Sarklot looked at her older brother and continued calmly, He has already stated it clearly, royal brother. Teos ground his teeth in stifled resentment, his expression darkening from the anger he was holding back. Sarklot still smiled brightly, continuing to mock him by Seos surely would not convict a national hero merely because that person had stood behind him. Looking at Teos' face twisted with rage, she turned aside and solemnly called Jin's name once more. Sarklot declared firmly that she would not force him to serve the kingdom, but if the country were ever in danger, would he be willing to lend his aid as a friend? At Jin's well-intentioned reply that he would be glad to help, Sarklot appeared satisfied. She clapped lightly and suggested that this place was not suitable for discussion, so everyone should move elsewhere. Sarklot immediately gave an order to the group of soldiers standing nearby. Lead the way for my friend, open a path with due ceremony, and maintain a respectful attitude. Before the princess's authority, her private female knight and the squad of soldiers could only bow their heads and obey decisively. Meanwhile, Teos stood frozen in the middle of the great hall, his face filled with the utmost resentment. The carriage then began to roll forward, carrying the entire group away from the royal palace. Sitting inside the carriage, August was still shaken, clutching his chest as he breathed a sigh of relief, and asked why Jin had done something so risky. Jin calmly looked out the window and replied that it had only been a momentary whim. Though he had already left the palace, he was still troubled by the strange killing intent from the prince. He narrowed his eyes slightly, hoping it had only been an illusion, but the instincts of a seasoned operative told him things were not that simple. Breaking the silent atmosphere, second Princess Sarklot smiled gently at Jin and thanked him for helping them. When Jin modestly said there was no need to thank him, she sincerely bowed her head and apologized for the royal family's discourteous treatment of the hero who saved the nation. Sarklot spoke solemnly. Allow me to introduce myself once more. I am Sarklot, second princess of this dynasty. She hoped Jin would continue to maintain this friendship. Faced with that goodwill, Jin gave a slight nod and replied yes. Sitting across from them, August was still unsettled and asked worriedly why the prince would act so rashly. Sarklot's expression suddenly turned serious, and she said in a low voice that she herself still did not know her royal brother's true intentions. But she knew royal brother was a man full of ambition. After ascending the throne, Teos intended to expand the territory through war with neighboring countries. When that time came, he would surely see Jin as a major obstacle to his ambitions. Hearing this, Jin sank into thought. Sarklot clapped loudly to reassure him, saying that she would not allow royal brother to interfere as he pleased any longer. She said that what happened today had likely already been reported by Hadid to their royal father, who was lying in bed. Sarklot affirmed that if their royal father issued an order of confinement, her older brother would find it difficult to act against Jin. He looked out the window and said softly that this was not what he was worried about. Sarklot smiled with resolve, saying that as for the throne, she had no intention of yielding it to her royal brother either. He asked Jin whether he believed her. Looking into those radiant blue eyes, Jin smiled faintly and replied that he did. Suddenly realizing that the carriage was still moving, Jin asked curiously where they were going. August also wondered why the princess was coming along, while Sarklot only answered gently they had saved the kingdom. She explained that if they invited someone like him over without a worthy reward, would that not be far too discourteous? Sarklot said she had heard that Jin was currently staying temporarily at an inn, and he nodded to confirm that it was true. The carriage stopped before a vast estate, majestic and extraordinarily splendid. Sarklot pointed brightly toward the magnificent mansion and declared firmly that this place had been prepared specially for Jin. Jin stared in astonishment at the mansion before him and blurted out. It was a splendid building with white stone pillars and imposing balconies, while Sarklot declared that from now on, this house officially belongs to you, and you may use it freely as you wish. The moment he stepped inside, Jin was overwhelmed by the glittering crystal chandeliers and the luxurious staircase covered in red carpet. He silently marveled at how luxurious the house was, then still unable to believe it, asked again whether he could truly accept such a grand gift. Sarklot explained that this place had once belonged to a count, but had been left vacant for a long time. Jin was slightly surprised when he heard the word count. Jin worried about the legality of it, fearing the former owner might return to reclaim the house. Seeing Sarklot's mysterious look, he could only tell himself he had been overthinking. Standing beside him, August explained that suddenly receiving a mansion might leave Jin confused, but it showed how highly they valued his abilities. August smiled and encouraged him to move in with peace of mind and not worry, because this house now belonged to him. Continuing the tour into the spacious bedroom, Jin fell silent and thought he understood, but living here alone seemed far too large. Even the bedroom was so spacious that he could not help feeling overwhelmed. Noticing Jin's awkwardness, August immediately made a rather practical suggestion. August said he would arrange additional servants to help him manage the place. Jin started and asked, "Servants, could the harem lineup be about to grow again?" August affirmed that Poguru and Nino would certainly always be willing to serve Jin with dedication. He sincerely said that he owed Jin an enormous debt of gratitude, then unexpectedly asked in a serious tone whether Jin could hear one more request. Jin looked at the other party with curiosity and asked in return, "What request is that?" Right after that, the scene shifted to the team's special training ground, number 7, where cheers and the sound of clashing weapons echoed throughout the space. In the middle of the training field, a tense match was unfolding, wooden swords striking each other again and again with sharp cracks. Karina charged forward with all her strength, swinging her spear to attack her opponent at an astonishing speed. With cold, sharp eyes filled with determination, she roared. With one decisive and practiced movement, Karina quickly drove her opponent into an overwhelming disadvantage. Forced into a corner, the Beastman warrior was drenched in sweat, gritting his teeth in frustration before gasping, "Stop, I admit defeat. It hurts too much." Immediately afterward, approving applause rang out. Ryan stepped closer and praised her. "You are improving quickly, Karina." While wiping away her sweat, Karina modestly replied that she still needed to try harder. Yet her mind briefly returned to the horrifying memory from a few days earlier, when she realized she had only been able to deal with a few weaklings. The image of Jin facing the enormous monster alone had always haunted Karina's mind. She irritably propped a hand against her head and asked in frustration if there was no one left to fight. Deep inside, Karina was still tormented by how a lower creature had managed to do something so extraordinary. Just then, a soldier cried out in alarm upon seeing the group enter. "Captain, Lady Sarklot is here too." August entered the training field with Jin and Princess Sarklot. He spoke softly, "Everyone, continue your training." The moment she saw Jin appear on the training field, Karina suddenly froze. Her expression changed at once, and she gritted her teeth in irritation. "Oh, it is that guy again. What is he doing here?" While Sarklot was being guided with great respect, Jin turned to August and asked, "So what now? What do you want me to do?" The captain answered quietly, "Now that you have come all the way here, surely you have already guessed." Looking at the soldiers training diligently below, Jin asked doubtfully, "You want me to guide them?" August confirmed decisively, "That is exactly right." August explained in a low voice, Jin must have seen Prince Tiaspan's arrogant and contemptuous attitude earlier with his own eyes. He revealed the harsh truth that Prince Teos and Princess Sarklot were now fiercely competing for the throne. August feared that no one could predict when that prince would resort to dirty tricks. He looked at his comrades and said clearly, "The only ones who can protect Princess Sarklot are our loyal team number 7. With eyes full of worry, August earnestly made his request. "No one knows when danger will strike, so I want you to train them to be ready for that day." Jin silently watched the fierce sparring matches on the training field and quietly assessed them. "These fighting styles are only good enough for show." The urging shouts rang out constantly amid the harsh clashes of weapons. "Just a little more." Jin realized that the soldiers of Team Number 7 had always trained diligently every day. However, when he saw them pushing themselves nearly to exhaustion, a sudden sense of nostalgia welled up inside him. Jin gave a faint smile, telling himself that this scene reminded him of the days when he had also been wrung dry. He remembered the time 100 million years ago, when he had once gone through days like these himself. Back then, to become an official national agent, Jin had to overcome insane training exercises, starting with running, then dragging huge stacks of tires, followed by grueling sessions of brutal high-intensity physical conditioning. Leaving his memories behind, Jin walked with August and Sarklot to the middle of the field. August ordered the entire team to assemble, then announced that today a national hero would serve as a special instructor to point out the shortcomings they needed to fix. "Is that understood?" The whole team shouted in unison, "Understood, Commander," while the soldiers whispered in admiration about the man who had once brought down the enormous monster. Jin thought to himself, guiding people who know how to listen is not difficult, but stubborn ones will probably be a little troublesome. His gaze stopped on Karina, who was showing clear dissatisfaction. Jin began the training session with a simple request. "First, I want to test your stamina. Now, everyone, run around the perimeter of the training field for me." Instructor Jin has started the torture again. Karina immediately reacted fiercely. "Huh?" She roared arrogantly, "We do that every day. There is no need to test us, our stamina is more than enough. Did you only come here to make us do these petty chores? You truly are far too insolent." August called Karina's name in a low voice, making her freeze at once. Noticing that defiance, Rian faintly curled his lips. "I sincerely apologize for what just happened. If that is the case, let us change the method a little." Jin removed his outer cloak, walked straight toward Karina, and asked, "That sounds interesting. The weapon you use is a spear, right?" Karina answered challengingly, "Ah, that is right." Jin took the spear and made an offer, "Try landing a single thrust on me. There is no time limit. If you can touch my body even just once, the running exercise will be cancelled." Witnessing that wager, August thought to himself, "That sounds interesting." Jin understood the mentality of these soldiers well. He told himself having to receive instruction from someone weaker than oneself is truly not easy for most people to accept. Karina smiled confidently and asked, "But do you even know how to use a spear?" Jin merely replied calmly, "Do not worry." Immediately afterward, he spun the spear in a continuous display at a speed that stunned everyone. Jin stood imposingly in the middle of the training field and declared loudly, "No matter what kind of weapon it is, I can use it too, do not look down on me." 100 million years ago, inside a modern training room, Jin was then a muscular young agent, diligently training his skills with a long spear. He displayed physical strength far beyond ordinary people, along with the intense focus of a top warrior. Kagura, wearing a white lab coat and holding a glass of water, strolled in leisurely and asked, "Oh, switching to spear practice today." Recognizing his familiar partner, Jin replied softly, "Kagura." Kagura asked curiously about his private life, aside from training. "Did you not have any other hobbies?" Jin took a sip of water and recalled with emotion, "When I was young, I often watched superhero shows." Kagura handed him the glass of water and reminded him, now, you are the nation's top agent, so you should rest now and then." Jin sighed and replied, "I do not have time for that. Most of my missions involve infiltrating organizations." He remembered the times he had fallen into danger while carrying out missions barehanded. Back then, Jin had been forced to grab anything around him, even a frying pan, to survive while surrounded by enemies. Jin stated firmly, therefore, no matter what weapon I hold, I must master it. All of it is only to increase my chances of survival, even if only by the slightest bit. Seeing his friend push himself to such extremes, Kagura smiled faintly and promised firmly, relax, I will make some top-tier toys for you to use. Karina rushed forward at an astonishing speed, swinging her spear and attacking Jin in a fierce barrage. Sharp sounds of impact rang out one after another, but Jin remained strangely calm. His cold blue eyes carefully observed every opening in the opponent's attacks. He easily neutralized every dangerous thrust from Karen. Karina was stopped by only light yet terrifyingly precise parries. Realizing her own helplessness, Karina was stunned, sweat pouring from her in exhaustion. Jin curled his lips as he looked at his opponent and calmly remarked, 15-0, sweetheart. Want to keep counting until tomorrow morning. Those words were like salt rubbed into her pride, making Karina grit her teeth in resentment and roar again. Without the slightest hesitation, she charged in again like a moth to a flame. Yet Jin still stood firm as a rock, decisively blocking her attack in an instant. The confrontation unfolded at a dizzying speed, causing Jin to silently assess her. Her movements were very fast. Her reaction speed was not bad either. Karina roared wildly, pouring all her remaining strength into the next strike. Blocking the powerful thrust, Jin was inwardly amazed by the female knight's strength. Her power was truly impressive. Each time the two spears collided, he could clearly feel the tremendous weight behind it. Jin quickly read her completely. He unleashed a razor-sharp spear strike. The blow knocked Karina's weapon flying, causing her to collapse to the ground in shock. Jin stood towering over his opponent with a stern gaze and declared decisively, "That is enough." Though she had just been knocked down, Karina still shouted with determination, "I can still keep fighting." But Jin only let out a faint sigh of exasperation. What a waste of effort. He turned and walked away, coldly pointing it out. Your stamina is already exhausted. The harder you push yourself, the weaker your stance becomes. That blunt remark left Karina frozen in stunned silence. Jin thought to himself that it was just as expected. She lacked endurance and was using her physique to cover up weak technique. That fighting style was still far from the necessary level of refinement. Jin realized that perhaps in this era, spirit arts were the center of every battle. Compared to the warriors of his era, the standards for necessary skill had completely changed. He told himself that first he had to rebuild her basic physical foundation. Jin looked down at Karina kneeling on the floor and asked, "You have no objections, do you?" Though her heart was filled with resentment and silent curses, Karina could not deny the other person's absolute dominance. Looking at Jin's unscathed hands, Karina could not help wondering in shock. He has not even shed a drop of sweat. What exactly is that body of his made of? At Jin's concerned remark, "Hey, are you planning to lie there until tomorrow morning?" He hesitated briefly, but then had to admit inwardly, "I have to accept it. This person truly is very strong." Casting aside her personal pride, Karina decisively took Jin's hand and stood up, officially acknowledging the unbelievable strength of the man before her. Jin turned to look at the whole team and suggested, "Then let us begin with a few laps." Under the watch of Argus and Milia, the soldiers, though still bewildered, were ready to enter the harsh training session. As night gradually fell and covered the capital, a crow, the black crow with blazing red eyes, flew past the gloomy castle. Inside the dark corridors, a mysterious figure holding a lantern silently walked among the cold stone walls. In a deep, dark corner within the capital's prison, the lantern-bearer silently approached the cell where the prisoner was chained. Looking at the prisoner, first Prince Teos curled his lips mockingly, "Say hello, old man. Is prison comfortable, Lord Rudman?" Facing the prince, Rudman still maintained a hard stance. Replied coldly, "Shut your mouth. What do I have to say to you?" Teos chuckled softly, narrowing his eyes as he observed the strangely calm expression of that lord. "Oh, you are still composed even in this situation. Are you still scheming something?" Stepping closer, Teos uttered a threat filled with hidden meaning. "Well, let us see. But I will tell you this, even if you escape this time, the royal family will eventually perish." Teos suddenly took out a piece of jewelry emitting a strange purple energy that made the lord cry out in shock. "Impossible. How did you obtain it?" Teos looked at the treasure and sneered. "Did you think you were the only one with access to this thing? Tools of the eroders, items empowered by them, correct?" Teos looked straight at Rudman and said firmly, "I assume you used a tool of the eroders to cause this chaos." He began drawing the lord in. "Do not rush to conclusions. The real conversation is only beginning now. You hate the Kamoser royal family very much, do you not? In that case, why not join hands with me?" Before Rudman's stunned gaze, Teos coldly laid out reality. "My father and those attendants are all far too named. If things continue like this country will sooner or later be invaded and collapse." Rudman asked back in a trembling voice to confirm, "You are a member of the royal family, yet you want to destroy it yourself." Teos answered only with a look full of resolve. That is right. Tear everything down and rebuild it in a different way. Teos bluntly revealed his bold ambition. This country must be rebuilt from the ground up, stronger and more authoritative. Faced with that vision overflowing with ambition, Rudman pondered for a moment, then nodded slightly. Very well, I cannot promise to place you upon the new throne. That does not matter either. In return, Teos extended the hand holding the radiant treasure toward the other man, then coldly ordered, "Be loyal to me, otherwise leave this place." Rudman asked back in confusion, "Loyal," and Teos nodded in confirmation. "It would be very troublesome if you betrayed me later." In his heart, that lord sneered in contempt, thinking that an oath meant nothing. "I will use you until you have no value left, then dispose of you at the final moment." Wearing a false smile on his lips, Rudman swore loudly, "Very well, I swear to be loyal to you." Teos formed a sinister smile, secretly thinking that the prey had stepped into the trap by himself. While Rudman was still bewildered and had not understood what was happening, the purple energy from the treasure suddenly erupted violently. It instantly enveloped his entire body. Strange ancient characters shone into being, tightening around that lord's mind. Rudman was completely subdued, his eyes turning a murky purple as he unconsciously repeated his oath of loyalty. That was the terrifying power of the forbidden tool. It planted an extremely powerful suggestion in anyone who spoke the correct keyword, making the victim believe that lie was his true desire. Rudman had now been completely subdued, kneeling at the prince's feet in an utterly miserable state. With eyes glowing in infatuated madness, he bowed his head and awaited orders. Rudman pleaded earnestly, "Your Highness, please command me as you wish." Teos looked down at him with a contemptuous smile. How pathetic. The very thought that someone of lowly blood like you wanted to replace the royal family disgusts me. He calmly turned his back and walked away, seeing everything as nothing more than chess pieces serving his plan. He leaned close to that lord's ear and declared that the one who would rule this country was not Sarklot, and even less so him. Teos proclaimed loudly, "This nation will be led by me."